Yo, what's up everyone? It's Omni Wizard, and today we're checking out what if Odin raised baby Harry Potter after he left at Dursleyes. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The Allfather's Choice. The owl arrived at Godric's Hollow at midnight. It was a tawny thing, fat and self-important, and it landed on the gate post of number 4, Privet Drive, before Dumbledore had even finished his conversation with McGonagall. He wasn't at Privet Drive yet, of course. He was still 2 streets over, fussing with the put-outer, collecting the street lamps into his palm one by one like a man gathering fallen coins. But the owl was already there, already waiting, already watching the bundle in his arms with the particular suspicion that owls reserve for things that are not mice. Dumbledore set the baby down on the doorstep with the letter tucked into the blankets, adjusted his half-moon spectacles, and looked at the door for a long moment. The number 4 glinted in the moonlight. The garden was neat and hostile, the kind of neat that says nothing unexpected is welcome here. A child's bicycle was locked to the front fence with a padlock that cost more than the bicycle. Petunia Dursley's garden, Petunia Dursley's house. The place Albus Dumbledore had decided was the safest location in Britain for the most famous child in wizarding history. "Goodbye, Harry," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away down the street, his purple robe sweeping the pavement, his footsteps soft as snowfall, and he did not look back. The baby slept. The street was empty, or it had appeared to be. The old man sitting on the low wall across from number 4 had been there long enough that the cold had settled into the stone beneath him, and the stone didn't bother complaining about it anymore. He wore a gray traveling cloak the color of a winter sky 10 minutes before a storm. His wide-brimmed hat was pulled low. A walking staff leaned against the wall beside him, gnarled and dark, carved with markings that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. One eye caught the moonlight. The other was hidden, not bandaged, not scarred, simply absent in the way that suggested it had been given for something, and whatever had been purchased with it had been worth the price. He watched Dumbledore leave. He watched the street reassemble itself into the appearance of emptiness. Then he crossed. He didn't hurry. His stride was unhurried the way a glacier is unhurried, inevitable, enormous, carrying within it the weight of accumulated centuries. The garden gate swung open before he touched it. Not because of a charm or a spell or anything the neighbors would have had words for. It opened because it recognized, on some level below mechanism, that refusing this particular man entry was not an argument worth starting. He stopped in front of the doorstep. The baby had one fist uncurled in his sleep, fingers splayed like a starfish, reaching for nothing. The letter was tucked into the blankets. The scar on his forehead was fresh, 3 weeks old, raw pink, a jagged bolt that still held a faint luminescence, a residue of something that had burned so brightly on the night of its making that it hadn't fully gone out. Odin reached down and picked up the letter first. He read it standing there in the dark in 30 seconds, with the expression of a man who has read 10,000 years of history and found most of it to be the same 4 mistakes repeated in different clothes. Then he folded it, slid it into his cloak, and looked at the child. The baby woke. It happened between one breath and the next, eyes opening, dark and bright and enormous, staring up at the old man with the hat and the single gleaming eye. No cry, no confusion. The child looked at Odin with the peculiar serenity of the very young, who have not yet learned to be afraid of things that are large and old and powerful. Odin looked back. The scar pulsed once, faintly like an ember remembering fire. He had seen sacrificial magic before. He had seen it in its oldest forms, in the spaces between worlds where the rules of cause and effect still negotiated their terms in blood and intention. A mother had stood between this child and a killing curse and said, in the language that has no words because it requires no words, "Not him, take me instead, not him." And the universe, which is not kind but is occasionally just, had honored that. Had taken the trade, had wrapped the child in it like armor. It wasn't a shield charm, it wasn't a ward, it was older than either. It was the same category of magic that had no name in English, only in languages that humans had mostly forgotten they'd ever spoken. Odin knew it. He respected it. He looked at the door of number 4, Privet Drive. He looked at the neat hostel garden and the expensive padlock on the child's bicycle and the curtain that had shifted twice in the upstairs window, and both times shifted back very quickly, very deliberately, the way curtains shift when the person moving them has decided they haven't seen anything and is prepared to be aggressive about that decision. He looked at the letter in his cloak. For his own protection. His mother's blood. Dursleyes will keep him safe. They will keep him small, Odin said, to no one, to the universe. He said it the way he said most things, as a statement of observed fact, delivered without anger, which somehow made it worse than anger. He picked up the child. Harry Potter grabbed the lapel of the gray cloak with both hands, held on with the absolute conviction of someone who has found a good handhold and sees no reason to let go, and went back to sleep. Odin walked back down the garden path. The gate closed behind him. He stepped off the pavement, and between one step and the next, the street absorbed the darkness around him, and he was simply gone. And number 4, Privet Drive, was quiet again, and the only evidence that anything had happened at all was the blank, cold doorstep with no letter and no child on it. In the upstairs bedroom, Vernon Dursley had been lying very still for 20 minutes, breathing very quietly, both eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling and hoping quite intensely that the morning would turn out to be the kind of morning where nothing unusual had occurred. He would get his wish, though not in any way he was expecting. Asgard in the early morning was gold, and vast and thunderously loud. Thor had apparently decided that dawn was an appropriate time to practice hammer throws in the eastern courtyard, and the sound of Mjolnir returning to his outstretched hand was carrying across the palace like a peal of bells designed by someone who hated bells. The ravens were displeased. The palace guards had developed the 1,000-yard stare of men who had been enduring this for 4 centuries and had made their peace with it, mostly. Frigga met Odin at the great doors before he'd taken 3 steps inside. She looked at the bundle in his arms. She looked at him. Her expression moved through several distinct stages: surprise, comprehension, a particular brand of exasperation that came with centuries of marriage, and then arrived without much apparent struggle at something softer. "Another son," she said. "A ward," Odin said. "That's what you said about Loki." There was a pause. "This one is different," Odin said. Frigga reached out and turned back the edge of the blanket. The child blinked up at her with enormous dark eyes and reached for a strand of her hair with the total lack of inhibition of the very young and the very confident. She let him take it. Smile crossed her face, the warm, unhurried smile of someone who has loved difficult things for a very long time and found it suited her. "He needs feeding," she said, "and a bath. He smells like cold November and whatever that aftershave is that English wizards seem to think is appropriate." "Dumbledore," Odin said. "I assumed. He left him on a doorstep." "Yes." Frigga was already moving, already carrying the child down the corridor toward warmth and light. "You can tell me the rest later. When you've decided how much of it you actually want to say out loud." Odin watched her go. The baby had still not made any sound of distress. He could hear, faintly, as Frigga turned the corner, the beginnings of what sounded like a story she was telling the child, her voice low and comfortable, the cadences of someone who had told stories to children for an incomprehensible span of years, and had never once found it beneath her. From the courtyard came the enormous clang of Mjolnir again. One of the ravens, Munin Memory, the one with the slightly judgmental beak, landed on Odin's shoulder and made a sound that was either a query or an accusation. "I know," Odin told him. The raven ruffled its feathers. "I said I know." He walked inside. The child's name remained Harry Potter. Odin could have changed it. He considered it for approximately 4 minutes and then dismissed the consideration, because the name was part of who the child was going to have to become, and erasing it would be the kind of mercy that was actually a harm. Harry James Potter, son of James and Lily Potter, born on the 31st of July. He had a history. He had a story that was already being told about him in the world below, and that story would require him to return to that world eventually. Odin was many things, but he was not in the habit of breaking tools he intended to use, and he was certainly not in the habit of lying to himself about what he was doing. He was raising a weapon. He was also, and this was the part that Frigga had understood from the first morning, and Odin had taken slightly longer to fully admit to himself, raising a child. The two things were not incompatible. They had never been incompatible in his experience. The best weapons were always the ones that understood what they were for. Harry's first word was mama, which he directed at Frigga with an accuracy and intentionality that made it entirely clear he understood the assignment. His second word was big, which he used to describe Thor, who was delighted. His third word was no, which he used prolifically and creatively from that point forward, including once when Odin was explaining something to him and Harry interrupted with it, then patted Odin's knee consolingly, which was the first time in 600 years that Odin had been at a genuine loss for how to proceed in a conversation. Loki, who had witnessed this, had laughed so hard he'd knocked over a table. They gave Harry a room in the palace that overlooked the training yards. This turned out to be both a blessing and a liability. A blessing because by the time Harry was 3 he had watched enough sparring to have opinions about fighting stances that were, Odin had checked, mostly correct. A liability because by the time Harry was 4 he had developed the habit of narrating Thor's practice sessions from the window in a running commentary that was loud enough to hear from the yard itself. And Thor, who was Thor, responded to the commentary with the enthusiasm of a man who has just discovered he has a personal announcer. "He's going to do the spinning one," Harry would announce, hanging off the windowsill. Thor would do the spinning one. "Too slow on the left. He always drops the left." "I do not drop the left," Thor would shout up at the window. "You just drop the left." The palace guards had stopped trying to suppress their laughter around year 3 of this arrangement. It was easier on everyone. Loki's relationship with Harry was more complicated and more satisfying. Loki had observed the child from a careful distance for the first 8 months, in the manner of a cat deciding whether or not a new piece of furniture was worth its time. Then one morning Harry had toddled into Loki's study, climbed onto a chair that was far too big for him, and announced with magnificent self-possession that he wanted to know how to make a thing disappear. Loki had looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" he said. "Thor keeps taking my apple," Harry said. "Thor takes your apple. Every time. He doesn't even eat it. He just puts it up high where I can't get it, for fun." Loki considered this. "And you want to make it disappear so he can't take it." "I want to make him disappear when he does it," Harry said, in the tone of someone making an entirely reasonable proposal. After that, they got along famously. Loki taught Harry things that Loki had taught no one else. Not because Harry was special, though he was, but because Harry was the first student Loki had ever had who genuinely understood why the sideways approach was often superior to the direct one. Harry learned illusion. He learned misdirection. He learned the art of making people see what they expected to see rather than what was actually there, which Loki delivered as a lesson in practical magic and Harry absorbed as a lesson in practical psychology, and both of them were satisfied with this interpretation. He also, inevitably, helped Harry get his apple back, multiple times, in ways that escalated considerably over the following years, until the apple situation had evolved into a running campaign of low-grade psychological warfare between Harry and Thor that the entire palace found entertaining except Thor, who found it entertaining approximately 60% of the time and genuinely bewildered the other 40. Odin watched all of this, said little, filed it away. He began Harry's formal education when the boy was 5. Not in weapons, Thor had been handling that informally since Harry was 3, lifting wooden practice swords that were half his height, and showing him footwork with the patient repetition of a man who genuinely loves the thing he is teaching. Number Odin began with stories. He would bring Harry to the seat by the great window in the evening, when the light over the Bifrost was going copper and gold, and he would talk. He told Harry the stories of the 9 realms in the same tone he used for council meetings, not as entertainment, but as information. Harry, who had been raised on Frigga's warm narrative style and Loki's sardonic commentary and Thor's enthusiastic reenactments, understood immediately that the stories Odin told were different. They had weight, they had texture, they left sharp edges where other stories were rounded. He told Harry about sacrifice, not in a moralistic way, in a factual way. These are the things that were given. These are the things that were purchased. This is what was lost and what was gained, and whether, in the long accounting of history, the ledger balanced. He told Harry about the Norns and about Yggdrasil and about the spaces between worlds where magic was not a learned skill, but a fundamental property of reality, the way heat is a fundamental property of fire. Harry listened the way he listened to everything Loki taught him, completely, quietly, storing it in some interior space and turning it over until it fit into a shape he could use. At 7, Harry asked the question Odin had been waiting for. They were in the study. Harry had been reading. He read the way he fought, with total commitment and an absolute refusal to be beaten by the material, and he set the book down and looked at Odin across the room with the particular directness he'd always had, that quality of eye contact that meant he had decided something was important enough to ask out loud. "Why did you take me?" Harry said. Odin did not look up from the document he was reading. "Because Dumbledore left you on a cold doorstep and called it protection," Odin said. "That's why you didn't leave me," Harry said. "That's not why you took me." A pause. Odin set down the document. He looked at Harry across the study, 7 years old, ink on his fingers, a shallow cut on his left forearm from this morning's sparring, still fresh, dark hair going every direction as it always had and apparently always would. The scar on his forehead had faded as he'd grown, become less raw, more settled, a mark rather than a wound, something worn rather than something suffered. "I took you," Odin said, "because I recognized what you were. What am I? The product of a sacrifice. Your mother gave her life as a shield. She transformed her death into protection powerful enough to break one of the most dangerous dark curses in existence. He paused. I know what that magic is. I know how rare it is, and I know that a child made of that magic and marked by the attempt to destroy it is not a child who should grow up under the stairs. Harry absorbed this. Under the stairs, he repeated. It was a very small cupboard, Odin said. I read the letter. Harry was quiet for a moment. So you took me because I was valuable. I took you because you were a child, Odin said, and there was something in his voice that closed the door on that line of questioning very quietly and very firmly. The way you close a door not because you're hiding what's behind it, but because the room is private. I kept you because you are mine. He held Harry's gaze. Those are different statements, both are true. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, picked up his book, and went back to reading. Odin watched him for a moment, then went back to his document. Later, much later, years later, Harry would tell Hermione that was the conversation where he understood what kind of man Odin was. Not kind exactly, not easy, but true. Every word measured, every word meant, nothing given that wasn't honestly given. He'd had worse fathers, Hermione had said. He'd had no fathers, Harry said. And then Odin. At 10, Harry began using a wand. It was Loki who suggested it. He'd been watching Harry's magic develop with interest. The boy had access to two distinct systems, though he didn't think of them in those terms yet. The wild old magic of Asgard had soaked into him the way cold soaks into stone, over years of proximity and contact, and learning in a place where magic was as ambient as weather. He could light things on fire by wanting to. He could make himself difficult to see when it suited him. Twice, in moments of strong emotion, he had produced effects that Loki catalogued carefully and said nothing about to anyone, because they were things that a 10-year-old boy should not have been capable of, and Loki knew better than to draw Odin's attention to them before the boy was ready to have that conversation. But he also had his mother's magic in him, Lily Potter's magic. The human wizarding tradition, a completely different architecture of power, channeled through will and words and focus, disciplined and technical and elegant in a way that Norse Sather was not. That magic was sitting in him unused, like a second language he'd never been taught to speak. He'll need a wand, Loki told Odin. When he goes back, he'll have one, Odin said. He should learn to use it before he goes. He shouldn't walk into their world having to figure out the basic mechanics while people are watching. Odin considered this. You think of everything, he said, in a tone that was simultaneously a compliment and a mild accusation. Someone has to, Loki said pleasantly. The wand they gave Harry was a temporary thing, one of the practice wands that Asgard's artificers kept for dealings with Wizarding World allies, plain holly with a core of something that wasn't quite phoenix feather, but was close enough to work. Harry picked it up and turned it over in his fingers, and it sparked immediately, a clean, bright spark that made the artificer sitting across the table blink and write something down very quickly. It does that for everyone, Harry asked. Not like that, the artificer said carefully. Harry pointed it at a candle across the room, and it lit. No incantation, no wrist motion. He just meant it to light, and it had lit. He turned to Loki. Isn't it supposed to be harder? For most people, Loki said, with the expression of a man deeply pleased by how a plan is going. The letter arrived when Harry was 10 years and 11 months old. It came by owl. The owl arrived looking slightly displaced. Asgardian owls were enormous and territorial, and this small British tawny had run into 3 of them on its approach, and was demonstrating the 1,000-yard stare of a creature that had looked into the face of genuine consequences for its life choices. It landed on the great table in the hall, fixed Harry with a look of profound reproach, and dropped the letter. Harry picked it up. Mr. H. Potter, the East Wing, the Golden Palace, Asgard. He turned it over. The Hogwarts seal, an H divided by a cross, 4 animals in the quadrants. He'd read about this. Odin had given him books on the Wizarding World 2 years ago, a stack of them, set them on his desk without comment, and by the time Odin mentioned them a month later, Harry had read them all twice and annotated the margins in 4 colors. He took the letter to Odin's study. Odin was standing at the window. He turned when Harry came in. I know what it is, Harry said. I know you do. Harry sat down, turning the letter over in his hands. It was unopened. He'd noticed that. He hadn't decided whether he was going to open it in front of Odin or privately, and he hadn't decided yet. Do I have to go? Harry said. No, Odin said, but I should. That, Odin said, is a different question. Harry opened the letter. He read it through once quickly, then again more slowly. The usual parchment, the usual ink, the curling Hogwarts letterhead, the list of supplies at the bottom. Robes, cauldron, beginners' spellbooks. Beginners, Harry said with a particular flatness. You'll manage, Odin said. They're going to make a fuss, Harry said. About who I am, what happened when I was a baby. Yes, I don't want to be that, Harry said, the boy who survived because his mother died. I don't want to be a story people own. Odin was quiet for a moment. He moved from the window and sat, not behind his desk, but in the chair adjacent to Harry's, which was a gesture significant enough that Harry noticed it. You are that story, Odin said. You cannot stop being it. What you can do is be other things as well. He met Harry's eyes. You are the boy your mother's sacrifice made. You are also the boy this family made. Both are true, neither cancels the other. Harry looked at the letter. Dumbledore will be there, he said. Yes, what do I do about him? Odin's eye was steady. You do nothing, you observe, you form your own judgment over time. A pause. He is not a villain, Harry. He is a man who made a decision that prioritized the many over the one, and in doing so lost sight of the one. That is not evil. It is a particular kind of failure. It is also, he added, a failure you have been warned about so that you do not repeat it. Harry considered this for a long time. Loki said he left me on a doorstep because I was more useful to him as a symbol of suffering than as a person with a good life, Harry said. Odin was quiet. Was he right? Loki, Odin said carefully, has a very precise eye for certain kinds of power, and a tendency to see motivation in its most cynical form, which is not always inaccurate. Harry almost smiled. So yes. I said no such thing, Odin said with perfect serenity. Harry stood up, folding the letter. He held it for a moment. Then he looked at Odin with the same clear directness he'd had since the first morning, the quality of eye contact that said he had something important to say and had decided to say it. I want to go, he said. I want to see it, my world, the other one. He paused. But I'm coming back. I know, Odin said. Every summer and Christmas. Harry, I mean it. I know you mean it, Odin said, and the corner of his mouth moved. I would not have expected otherwise. Thor's reaction to the news was everything Harry had expected. A school, Thor said. You're going to school? Yes, Harry said. A school for wizards, apparently. Thor had grabbed him by both arms, lifted him approximately 2 feet off the ground, and shaken him with the enthusiastic violence of a man expressing profound emotion through physical means. This is excellent, Thor announced. You'll be the best one there. Obviously, you have trained with me. I have trained with you, Harry agreed, from 2 feet in the air. And Loki. You will be unstoppable, Thor declared, setting him down and immediately pulling him into a hug that expressed, with its thoroughness, approximately 9 years of brotherly affection. Write to me, constantly. Tell me everything, I want to know about all of it. I'll write, Harry said, muffled by Thor's shoulder. And if anyone troubles you, Thor, I could come and simply, Thor, Harry said, extracting himself. He looked up at Thor. Thor was enormous and would always be enormous, and Harry had made his peace with the fact that he would never not have to look up at Thor with a level of patient affection that had been worn smooth by 9 years of exactly this. I will handle it, Thor looked at him. I know, Thor said, and he was grinning, but his eyes were doing something else, something quieter. He reached out and clapped Harry on the shoulder, once firmly, the way you seal an agreement. I know you will. Loki found him in the evening, sitting at the top of the eastern tower where Harry went when he wanted to think without being interrupted. Loki appeared the way Loki always appeared, between moments, between one breath and the next, casually present where he had not previously been. He sat beside Harry on the stone and looked out over the Bifrost and said nothing for a while. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind built over years of shared mischief and long afternoons, and the particular closeness that comes from someone teaching you how they actually think. You're going to be the strangest student Hogwarts has ever had, Loki said finally. Good, Harry said. They'll expect the boy who lived. Loki glanced at him sidelong, scared, grateful, overwhelmed by everything, desperate for belonging. I know. What will you give them instead? Harry thought about this. Below them, the Bifrost shifted colors in the evening light, the great bridge running out over the edge of everything. He had grown up looking at it. The edge of the known world, and beyond it everything else, every other realm, the vast and inexhaustible otherness of existence. He had grown up knowing that the edge was not the end. Myself, Harry said. Just that, Loki smiled. Was the rare kind, the genuine kind, the one that didn't have anything tactical behind it. Spoken like someone who was raised right, he said. They sat there until the light had gone completely and the Bifrost was pure luminescence in the dark, and neither of them said anything more, and it was enough. The morning Harry left, Frigga braided a thin cord of silver into his hair just behind his left ear, a small thing, easily missed, woven with a protection she didn't name. Harry held still for it. He was old enough to know what it was and what it meant, and that accepting it was not weakness but sense. She cupped his face in both hands when she was done and looked at him. You are going somewhere that does not know you, she said. They will look at your scar and think they do. They don't. Her thumb brushed the lightning bolt. You know what you are, that is enough. He covered her hands with his. I'll be back at Christmas, he said. I know, she said. Your room will be as you left it. She let go. Harry stepped back, adjusted his bag on his shoulder. He was wearing Midgardian clothes at Loki's firm suggestion. Jeans, dark jacket, boots, a plain gray shirt, because arriving at King's Cross in Asgardian traveling gear would be the kind of first impression that was difficult to recover from. Odin was at the door. He did not hug Harry. That was not how they were, and they had both always known this, and neither of them had ever needed it to be different. He put his hand on Harry's shoulder once briefly with a weight that was not physical, the way the sea is heavy in a way that has nothing to do with volume. Remember, Odin said. Harry looked at him. Wisdom before strength, Odin said. Strength when wisdom fails, and after everything, choose what you can live with, Harry finished. I know. Odin looked at him for a moment. One eye steady and vast, and somehow both ancient and completely present. Yes, he said, you know. Harry went through the great doors and into the morning, into whatever came next, carrying with him the weight of Asgard and the lightness of someone who has been loved by giants and found it, on balance, entirely worth the altitude. Behind him, the ravens circled once. Then they were still. Chapter 2, The Boy They Didn't Expect. King's Cross Station at 11 in the morning was the kind of organized chaos that London had perfected over centuries. A roar of announcements and shoe leather, and the smell of coffee going cold in paper cups. Pigeons navigating the ironwork overhead with the bored confidence of creatures who had decided the station belonged to them and were simply allowing the humans to use it. Harry walked through it with his trolley and didn't look lost, which was the first thing the wizarding world was going to have to adjust to. He'd been to Midgard twice before, once with Loki, who'd taken him through the Bifrost to London specifically, so Harry would know what London looked like before he had to navigate it alone, and once with Frigga, a quieter trip, a single afternoon in a garden in the countryside where she'd shown him what early autumn England smelled like and why it mattered that he know the place his parents had lived in. He was not arriving blind. He had never, in his memory, arrived anywhere blind. Odin had seen to that. The trolley had a trunk on it. The trunk had everything on the Hogwarts list, acquired through a combination of Loki's contacts in the wizarding world and one very strange afternoon in Diagon Alley 3 weeks ago, which Harry had attended alone because Loki had declared the wizarding world's fashion to be personally offensive to him and refused to set foot in it. The wand was the part Harry had found most interesting. He'd gone to Ollivander's alone. The shop was narrow and dusty and smelled of cedar and old intention, and Garrick Ollivander himself was a small, pale man with silver eyes that held the slightly unfocused quality of someone who spent most of their time looking at things that weren't quite in the visible spectrum. He'd come out from between shelves that reached the ceiling and looked at Harry the way a craftsman looks at an interesting problem. Then he'd looked at the scar. Harry Potter, he'd said, and his voice had done the thing. The thing Harry had already encountered twice in Diagon Alley and was learning to identify. A sort of hushed internal recalibration, a breath held, a significance attached to the syllables of his name that had nothing to do with him personally and everything to do with the story people had been telling about him for 10 years. Just Harry, Harry said, pleasantly, the same way he'd been saying it all afternoon. Ollivander had measured him, arm length, wand hand, span of fingers, with a tape measure that moved on its own, which Harry watched with polite interest rather than the startled delight Ollivander seemed to be expecting. You've seen self-directing objects before, Ollivander said, watching him. A few, Harry said. Where did you grow up? With family, Harry said. Abroad. Ollivander had looked at him for a moment with those silver eyes, and Harry got the impression he was being assessed in some very particular way, and didn't mind, and let the assessment happen without trying to manage it. The first 3 wands did nothing interesting. The 4th, ash and dragon heartstring, produced a sharp crack when Harry picked it up, like a branch breaking, and every box in a 12-foot radius rattled off its shelf. Ollivander took it back quite quickly. The wand they ended up with was holly, 11 inches, single phoenix feather, and when Harry curled his fingers around it, the shop went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the waiting quiet of something about to happen, the settled quiet of something that had just found where it belonged. Gold sparks drifted from the tip, slow and warm, the way light moves through amber. Curious, Ollivander said softly. You've said that about a few of them, Harry said. The phoenix who gave this feather gave only one other, Ollivander said. He was studying the wand in Harry's hand with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with something more complicated. Curious that you should end up with it. Harry looked at the wand. The other one, he said. Voldemort's. Ollivander blinked, not at the name or not only at the name but at the complete flatness with which Harry said it. No flinch, no dramatic pause, just a word. Yes, Ollivander said carefully. You know his name. Should I not? Harry said. Most people don't say it. Avoiding a word doesn't make what it represents less real, Harry said. It just makes the word powerful, which is backwards. He turned the wand over in his fingers one more time, feeling the fit of it, the specific resonance it had against his palm. It was different from the practice wand, deeper, more particular, like the difference between a knife that fits your hand and one that merely works. I'll take it. Ollivander had watched him walk out of the shop with the expression of a man who had just had a conversation he needed to sit down and think about. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 was a solid brick wall until it wasn't. Harry walked through it at a measured pace, not running, not hesitating, and felt the brief compression of a threshold crossing, the familiar texture of old enchantment, and then he was on platform 9 3/4 and the Hogwarts Express was 30 feet away, red and massive and breathing steam into the morning air. He stood for a moment. The platform was full. Families in robes standing in clusters, owls in cages, cats wound around ankles, toads making theological arguments from the bottoms of boxes. Children his age moving between excitement and nerves in that particular 11-year-old ratio. Parents saying the things parents say at train stations, which are roughly the same regardless of whether the train goes to Surrey or to a school of witchcraft and wizardry. Right, eat properly, don't start anything, do start anything if you have to, I love you. A woman with violently red hair and 7 children distributed around her at varying heights was managing a logistical situation near the front of the train involving 2 trunks, a rat in a cage, and an argument between 2 boys who were apparently twins. Harry clocked her as someone useful to know and filed this away. He loaded his trunk without difficulty, as Guardian physical training was not subtle in its outcomes, and found a compartment near the middle of the train. The ginger-haired boy found him about 10 minutes later, slightly breathless, with a smudge of something on his nose and the look of someone who had just escaped a situation he was hoping not to have to explain. He stuck his head in the compartment door. Anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full, or there's this one with a girl who's already started telling me what spells she's practiced, and she's been talking for 20 minutes and I think she might actually know everything. Sit down, Harry said. The boy sat. He had a rat in a cage on his lap, a battered trunk, and a face that was almost entirely freckles, which Harry found immediately likable in the way that people are likable when their face tells a straightforward truth about them. Ron Weasley, the boy said. Harry Potter, Harry said. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the scar. It was visible. The hair had fallen back from it, and then, with visible effort, looked away from the scar and back at Harry's face, which Harry appreciated enormously. Right, Ron said. That's yeah. He was quiet for a second, readjusting. Where'd you grow up then? Everyone thought you were with muggles. With family, Harry said. Abroad. Wizard family or not wizards number. Ron seemed to be working something out. But you knew you were a wizard. Yes, Harry said. And you knew about Hogwarts. Yes. And you know who and all that. Harry looked at him. Voldemort, he said in exactly the same tone he'd used in Ollivander's. Ron made a face. Not fear, well, fear, but the kind that fights itself into respect. You just say it like that. Like what? Like it's just a word. It is just a word, Harry said. He's not dead and he's not gone, and calling him you know who doesn't make him less dangerous. It just means he's the only one who gets to have a name, which seems like a bad position to be in. Ron stared at him. Then he smiled, a wide, uncomplicated smile that rearranged his whole face into something that was going to be very difficult not to like. My brothers are going to think you're brilliant, he said. How many brothers? 5, and a sister. Fred and George are the twins. They're at Hogwarts already, 3rd year. Bill and Charlie are done. Percy's a prefect. He said the last word with the resigned tone of someone who has had to share a bathroom with a prefect. Large family, Harry said. It has its moments, Ron said. Mum's brilliant. Dad's brilliant, but he gets very excited about things that plug into walls. He paused. Your family abroad, what were they like? Complicated, Harry said. Good, he thought for a moment. My grandfather he has very high expectations and a very long memory and one eye, and he's probably the most intelligent person I've ever met. One eye, lost it a long time ago. He doesn't talk about it. What about your parents? Ron said, then immediately seemed to regret it, a brief flash of the realizing too late expression, the small social horror of having asked the wrong question. Dead, Harry said simply. Both of them. When I was a year old, he watched Ron's face go through the calculation. I didn't know them. I have the life I have, which is a good one. You don't have to worry about having asked. Right, Ron said, and visibly settled. Okay. They talked for an hour, about Quidditch mostly, which Ron knew with the encyclopedic devotion of someone raised in it, and Harry knew, with the appreciation of an outsider who'd been told about it at length by people who played something broadly comparable on flying horses. The food trolley came and Harry bought a substantial amount of everything on it, and split it without making a ceremony of the generosity, which Ron accepted without making a ceremony of the receiving. And by the time the girl from the compartment next door appeared in their doorway, they had already formed the specific easy shorthand of two people who have decided without needing to say so that they get along. The girl she was immediately, obviously someone. There was no other way to describe it. She had a great deal of brown hair and the focused, slightly too alert eyes of someone who had been the cleverest person in every room they'd ever walked into and was always slightly tense about whether this room would be different. She had a book open in one hand and her wand out in the other. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "I've been trying the Lumos charm and I've got it working, but it keeps flickering at the end, and I can't work out if it's a wrist problem or a pronunciation problem. And I noticed you both haven't left your compartment, so I thought I'd ask if anyone else was working on anything." Ron said nothing. His expression said he'd been found. Harry looked at her wand. "Try it," he said. "What?" "Try the charm, show me." She blinked, clearly expected to have to explain further to argue for attention, and then she raised her wand and said Lumos with crisp, precise enunciation, and a light bloomed at the wand tip, warm and steady, and then flickered and went slightly uneven at about the 2-second mark. Harry nodded. "It's the wrist. You're rotating slightly on the second syllable, like you're finishing the motion. Hold the position through the whole word." "The pronunciation's fine." She stared at him. "How do you—" "I've been practicing wand work for a year," Harry said. "Try again." She tried again, held her wrist steady. The light bloomed and held and didn't flicker. A smile broke across her face, genuine, brilliant, entirely unguarded for about 3 seconds before she remembered to be composed about it. "That's it," she said. "That actually worked." She looked at Harry. "Harry Potter, right? I read about you in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, and—" "I know," Harry said. "Have a seat." "I was going to go back to my—" "Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. He said her name the way Odin said things, not as an instruction, just as the word, placed gently and firmly like a stone. "Sit down. Ron, move the rat." "The rat's comfortable," Ron said. "Move the rat," Harry said. The rat moved. Hermione sat. Draco Malfoy arrived at the compartment 40 minutes before they reached Hogwarts. He had 2 boys with him who were large in the way that people are large when their primary function is to stand behind someone and look unpleasant. He stood in the doorway with the posture of someone who had been told since birth that rooms rearranged themselves to accommodate him, which they usually did. "They're saying Harry Potter's in here," he said, looking at Harry with the assessing look of someone who has already written the conclusion and is simply checking the data against it. "That's me," Harry said. Malfoy looked him over. The jeans, the dark jacket, the lack of robes, the steady, unimpressed eye contact. He recalibrated quickly. Harry could see him do it and adjusted to a version of himself that was performing superiority rather than simply assuming it, which was a meaningful distinction. "I'm Draco Malfoy," he said. Harry said nothing. A flicker crossed Malfoy's face. People said things when he said his name. They always said things. "You might want to be careful about who you make friends with," Malfoy said, glancing at Ron in a way that had years of class contempt compressed into it. "Some families are better connected than others." "Is that right?" Harry said. It was not a question. "The Weasleys, for instance." Malfoy's voice was light, pleasant, the precision of a person who has learned to make cruelty sound like information. "Not exactly the best sort." Ron's jaw had gone tight. Harry saw it and placed one hand briefly on the armrest between them, not touching, just present, and Ron stayed quiet. Harry looked at Malfoy with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who has watched Thor and Loki argue for 9 years and has thereby developed an extremely refined eye for the difference between power and the performance of power. "You've come to my compartment," Harry said, "to tell me who my friends should be." A pause. "Why?" Malfoy blinked. "I'm offering." "You're offering me a social hierarchy and suggesting I position myself advantageously within it," Harry said. "I understand that. I'm asking why you thought that was something I needed from you." The 2 large boys shifted. Malfoy's pleasant expression became something else for a second, something younger and less polished, before he got it back. "The wizarding world works a certain way," Malfoy said, and there was an edge under it now, the edge that comes when the script isn't working. "Maybe," Harry said. "I don't plan to let the world work me, but thanks for coming by." It was a dismissal so clean and so complete that Malfoy had no move left. He was too smart not to know it. He looked at Harry for one more second, Not with anger, not exactly, but with the specific expression of someone who has encountered something they didn't account for and have filed it under to be revisited, and then he turned and left, the two large boys following. Hermione had her book open in front of her face, but her eyes weren't moving. "You handled that well," she said after a moment. "My uncle taught me that you never win an argument by accepting the other person's terms," Harry said. "If someone builds the arena, don't fight in it." "Your uncle sounds interesting," Hermione said. "He'd enjoy hearing you say that," Harry said, "for entirely different reasons than you'd want." They arrived in the dark, which was the right way to arrive. The boats crossed the lake with the castle filling the sky above them, every tower lit, the windows throwing gold across the black water. First years sat four to a boat, and nobody said much because there was nothing to say that would be better than the view. Even Hermione, who had presumably read descriptions of this exact crossing, was quiet. Harry sat in the bow. Ron sat across from him, and Hermione beside Ron, and a boy Harry hadn't spoken to, small, blonde, very frightened, looking in the way of someone who has been frightened for a long time and has become expert at managing it, sat in the fourth spot. The castle was enormous and ancient and staggering. Harry had grown up in a palace built by gods before the concept of human architecture had fully developed, and Hogwarts still managed to be staggering. It was not the size. Asgard's halls were larger. It was the accumulation of it, century on century of intention and learning and life pressed into stone, the way a wall holds warmth after the sun has set. He could feel the magic in it. Not the precise, channeled kind of a wand spell, the ambient kind, the old kind, the kind that Odin had taught him to recognize as the signature of a place where power had been worked for a very long time. He put his hand on the edge of the boat and felt it in the water too, faintly. The wards, deep and layered, going all the way down. "You can feel it, can't you?" Hermione said quietly. He looked at her. She was watching him with those two alert eyes. "The wards," he said. "I read that Hogwarts has protective enchantments that are over 1,000 years old," she said. "I couldn't find a proper description of what they'd feel like." "Like very old stone," Harry said. "Like something that's been kept." She was quiet, processing this, and he could see her storing it, adding it to whatever internal architecture of knowledge she was building. The boats touched the shore. Professor McGonagall was exactly what Harry had expected from everything he'd read, and nothing he could have fully prepared for anyway. She was tall and precise, and had the quality of a blade that is perfectly maintained, not cold exactly, but containing its heat somewhere internal, directed entirely by choice. She looked at the first years assembled in the entrance hall, and her gaze traveled across them with the efficient comprehension of someone conducting a rapid structural survey. It landed on Harry. He watched the same calculation cross her face that had crossed everyone else's face. That scar, that name, what does this mean? And then, more than anyone else today, she moved past it. She filed it, she moved past it, and she looked at him as a student. He liked her immediately. "The sorting will begin shortly," she told them. "The ceremony is straightforward. The sorting hat will place you in one of four houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin. Your house is your family for the next 7 years. Conduct yourselves accordingly." She swept out. The other first years immediately dissolved into anxious comparison of notes. Hermione recited the four founders' names and dates under her breath in the manner of a student checking their working. Ron went slightly pale and said something about having to fight a troll, and Harry said that was almost certainly not accurate, though he said it without total conviction because he had grown up in a place where the metaphors often turned out to be literal. The ghosts arrived, which caused the expected reaction. Harry watched a girl nearby go very still and then carefully compose herself. He watched two boys stumble backward into each other. Ron made a sound that he immediately converted into a cough. Harry watched the ghosts with genuine curiosity. They were something Asgard didn't have, or had in a different form. The dead in his world went to different places, all of them definitive, none of them this in-between hovering. There was something melancholy about it. They'd chosen to stay. He wondered how many of them regretted it. "First years," McGonagall's voice cut through the hall. "Follow me." The Great Hall was every description he'd read, and none of them, because descriptions could not capture the scale of the sky ceiling, or the warmth of 4,000 floating candles, or the weight of 1,000 sets of eyes turning at once when the first years filed in. Harry filed in between Ron and Hermione. He heard his name go through the hall like a wave in a pool, not all at once, but in rings spreading out from wherever people first spotted him. He heard the whispers. He kept his eyes forward. The sorting hat was placed on a stool at the front. It was old and battered, and it had a rip near the brim that opened into something like a mouth, and when it opened that mouth and began to sing, the song was, Harry had to admit, surprisingly good. A full history of the houses in rhyme, delivered with the specific confidence of something that has been performing the same material for 1,000 years and has made peace with its catalog. The sorting began, names called, children walking forward, the hat dropping over their heads, and then, sometimes after a long pause, sometimes almost immediately, the house called out to the hall and the table erupting. Harry watched the long pauses. He watched what happened in the long pauses, the way the child's face changed, going inward, having a conversation with something. He filed this away. Potter, Harry. The whisper in the hall was louder this time. He walked up to the stool with the same pace he always walked, not quick, not slow, the pace of someone who has somewhere to be and isn't worried about getting there, and sat down. The hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. Then a voice, dry and old and specific, a voice that was not quite in his ears but not quite in his mind either. Well, said the hat, this is different. I've been told that a few times today, Harry said. I don't mean the scar, the hat said. I mean everything underneath it. What have they done to you up there? Made me useful. Made you more than useful. A pause. The hat was sorting through him. He could feel it, not unpleasantly, the way you might feel someone carefully turning the pages of a book rather than rifling through it. Plenty of courage, plenty, but not reckless. Not at all reckless. There's a patience here, a long view, a willingness to wait for the right moment. Difficult. Very difficult. Take your time, Harry said. Wit and wisdom in equal measure, the hat continued, almost to itself. Loyalty deeper than you make it look, and something else, something I haven't felt in a very long time. Old power, not the scar that's layered over you like a second skin. I can feel it, mother's magic, ancient and warm. No, this is something you've acquired, something ambient. As if you've been breathing magic for so long it's gotten into your bones. Something like that, Harry said. Ravenclaw would suit you, the hat said, but you don't particularly care about being suited. You care about being useful. And the place where you'd be most useful, the place where you would do the most good, given what's coming, given what lives in Quirinus Quirrell's classroom and breathes through the back of his head. Harry went very still. You already know, the hat said, and its voice had something in it that wasn't quite admiration but was in the same neighborhood. Of course you do. Tell me the house, Harry said. Gryffindor, said the hat to the hall. The Gryffindor table went up in a roar. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, and walked to the table where Ron was already standing up to wave him over, and Hermione, sorted 3 names earlier, was applauding with the restrained enthusiasm of someone trying very hard not to look too pleased. He sat down between them. He was thinking about what the hat had said, what lives in Quirinus Quirrell's classroom and breathes through the back of his head. He'd noticed it too during the entrance hall. When the defense against the dark arts teacher had shuffled past, a small, nervous man in a turban who smelled of garlic and something else underneath the garlic, something sour and old and cold, Harry had felt the same sense of wrongness he felt when Loki showed him something that was not what it appeared to be. A glamour, a concealment, something wearing a face that wasn't its own. He picked up his fork as the feast appeared. You all right? Ron said, mouth already full of chicken. You went somewhere for a second. Just thinking, Harry said. About what? Our defense professor, Harry said. Ron looked down the table to where Quirrell was sitting at the high table, fidgeting with his turban. He seems a bit wet, doesn't he? Yes, Harry said. He does. He ate his dinner and talked and laughed when Ron said something ridiculous about Percy, and helped Hermione identify a herb in the salad she'd been quietly quizzing herself on, and watched Quirrell at the staff table at intervals, and thought about what the sorting hat knew and how it knew it, and what you did when you arrived at a school on the first day, and found out that the danger Odin had warned him was coming was already here, already installed. Already wearing human skin in a classroom on the 3rd floor. You ate your dinner, he decided. You made your friends, and you waited for the right moment. The dormitory was circular, 6 beds with dark red curtains, fire going in the hearth. Harry sat on his bed while the other Gryffindor boys figured out the bathroom schedule and argued about who had the most floor space, and he opened his trunk and found, tucked into the very bottom beneath his school robes and his spellbooks, and the Asgardian knife he'd packed on a decision he wasn't entirely prepared to examine, a small dark object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it, a raven's feather, black, glossy, perfect. Not from Hugin or Munin directly, this was a feather they'd left for him deliberately, placed on his pillow 2 nights before he'd left. A reminder, they see everything. What they see, Odin knows. What Odin knows, Odin remembers. He held it for a moment. Then he set it carefully on the nightstand. Ron was at the next bed, looking at him with the friendly curiosity he'd been deploying all day. What's that? A feather, Harry said. From who? My grandfather's ravens, Harry said. Ravens. Ron lay back on his bed, staring at the canopy. Are they magic ravens? Harry thought about Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, the two ravens of the Allfather, who flew every day to every corner of the 9 realms and returned at night with everything they'd seen, who had watched him grow up and occasionally stolen food off his plate when they felt he wasn't paying sufficient attention to the world around him. Yes, Harry said. Wicked, Ron said with total sincerity. Harry lay back on his own bed. Through the window, stars. Different here than at home, the same stars, technically, but without the Bifrost to throw light across them, they looked closer, smaller, more ordinary. He found the familiar ones anyway. Habit. Down in the Great Hall, the feast was still going. Down the corridor, somewhere in the Dada classroom, something wearing a human body was sleeping, or not sleeping, or doing whatever it was that ancient dark spirits did when the lights went out. He thought about what Odin would say. Observe, Odin would say. Understand it fully before you move against it. A half-understood enemy is more dangerous than a fully understood one. Good night, Ron, Harry said. Night, Ron said. Hey, what? I'm glad you're in Gryffindor, Ron said. Just, since you asked earlier where you were going to end up, and I said Gryffindor, and you ended up in Gryffindor. You said Gryffindor because you're in Gryffindor, Harry said. Yeah, well, I was right, wasn't I? Ron said, with the tone of a man establishing a statistical baseline for future arguments. Harry almost smiled. Good night, Ron, he said again. The fire settled. The stars stayed where they were. And Harry Potter, raised by the Allfather, trained by the God of Thunder, schooled by the God of Mischief, loved by the Queen of Asgard, lay in his first bed at Hogwarts and thought, clearly and without fear, about what he was going to do about the thing at the back of Professor Quirrell's head. He'd think about it more tomorrow. He had time. Chapter 3. The Weight of Old Magic. The first week at Hogwarts moved the way new things move, fast and strange and packed with details that would only make sense later. Harry filed everything. Not deliberately, not with the strained concentration of someone trying to memorize a map. It was simply the way he'd been wired since childhood, since Odin had first sat him down with a story and shown him that every detail was a thread, and every thread led somewhere. The route from Gryffindor Tower to the Great Hall. The staircase that moved on Thursday mornings. The gap between the 3rd and 4th steps from the bottom on the main staircase that Ron fell into twice before Harry caught him on the 3rd attempt, and Ron had said nothing but had looked at him with a kind of stunned gratitude. The ghost who haunted the 1st floor corridor and had strong opinions about the ghost on the 2nd floor. The exact interval at which Professor Quirrell's hands shook. That last one was what he kept coming back to. It wasn't constant. That was the interesting part. In the corridor in the Great Hall, Quirrell was nervous in the general way of a man who'd been nervous so long it had become structural. A stammer, a flinch, the permanent, slightly apologetic posture of someone who had arranged his entire exterior to say, please don't notice me. But in the classroom, when he was in front of students, there were moments when the shaking stopped, when something settled behind his eyes that wasn't quite Quirrell, just for a second. Just long enough to be wrong in a way that Harry had learned, at Loki's knee, to recognize. Someone in a mask that occasionally slips. The classroom itself smelled of garlic, and something underneath the garlic, cold and ancient and faintly metallic, like blood that had dried and been there for years. Harry sat in the back left corner of every Dada class, which Hermione had noted was unusual for him given that he sat in the front in every other class, and which he had not explained, and which she had accordingly filed under things Harry knows that he hasn't told me yet in that methodical brain of hers. The defense lessons themselves were, there was no kind way to say it, poor, not fraudulent exactly. Quirrell knew the theory. He knew it the way a man knows a language he learned from books and has never spoken to a native speaker, technically correct, affectless, disconnected from the living thing it was supposed to describe. He taught them the counterjinx for the Jellylegs curse with the enthusiasm of someone reading instructions off a bottle of medicine. He taught them about dark creatures from a textbook that Harry had already read twice, and which the other Harry, the one Dumbledore had planned for, would probably have found overwhelming and marvelous in equal measure. Harry found it thin. He did not say so in class. This was Odin's influence showing, the understanding that making your knowledge visible before you understand the terrain was tactically wasteful. So he sat in the back and took notes and answered questions at 60% of his actual capability and watched Quirrell. Flitwick's charms class was something else entirely. Professor Flitwick was a small man with an enormous energy who stood on a stack of books to see over his lectern and taught with the specific joy of someone who genuinely loved the thing they were explaining. He introduced them to Wingardium Leviosa on the 3rd day, demonstrating the wand movement, swish and flick, long swish on the wind, sharp flick on the gar, with the pride of an artist showing technique. Now then, he said, his voice carrying despite its smallness. In pairs, feather on the desk, off we go. Ron, partnered with Hermione by alphabetical proximity, attempted it with the wrist action of a man trying to start a reluctant lawn mower. The feather twitched. "You're saying it wrong," Hermione said, not unkindly. "It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa. "You do it then," Ron said, with the slightly tight tone of someone who knows they're being corrected, but has a fundamental policy position against admitting it. Hermione did it. The feather rose, cleanly and immediately, about 8 inches above the desk, and rotated slightly as if orienting itself. Flitwick made a small sound of genuine delight and pointed at her for the benefit of the class. Harry partnered with a quiet boy named Neville Longbottom, who held his wand like a man expecting it to turn on him at any moment, watched the feather on their desk with the particular stillness he brought to new problems. "You first," he told Neville. "Go ahead." Neville looked at him as if this might be a trap. "I might get it wrong," Neville said. "Then you'll get it wrong and we'll work out why," Harry said. "Go ahead." Neville attempted it. The feather shot sideways and fell off the desk. "Okay," Harry said. He picked up the feather and set it back. "When you do the swish, you're starting with your elbow, start with your wrist. And the word, you're dropping your voice on the second syllable, which kills the assent. The motion and the intent have to match. You're flicking down." "Flick up," Neville tried again. The feather rose. Not far, maybe 2 inches, and wobbled considerably, but it rose, and Neville's face did something Harry thought he'd probably remember for a long time. The specific, unguarded expression of someone who has been told for long enough that they can't do something, that doing it produces pure shock before joy can catch up. "There it is," Harry said. "I did it," Neville said. "You did. It's only 2 inches. 2 inches off the ground is 2 inches off the ground," Harry said. "Everything that's ever flown started there." He turned back to his own feather. One easy motion, one word, not even really needing the word. The wand was an amplifier rather than a requirement at this point, but he kept it precise and clean because that was the discipline, and the discipline was the point. The feather rose to the ceiling, turned twice, and came back down and landed on the desk with the precision of something that had been placed there by hand. Flitwick stared at him from across the room. Harry looked up. "Is that perfectly done?" Flitwick said carefully. "Extraordinary precision for a first year." A pause. "How long have you been practicing wand work?" "About a year," Harry said. "With whom?" "Privately," Harry said pleasantly. Flitwick looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man doing complicated mathematics in his head. Then he smiled, a real smile, the appreciative kind. "Well," he said, "we'll see what the rest of the term brings, won't we, Mr. Potter?" McGonagall's transfiguration was where things became impossible to conceal, which meant Harry had to make a decision about how much to conceal. She was transforming matches into needles. A simple conversion, shape and material, the object's essential nature redirected. She demonstrated it once, brisk and complete, the match becoming a gleaming steel needle between her fingers, and set the class to work. The room filled with the sound of concentrated effort and occasional small accidents. One match turned briefly into something that was arguably a needle but had opinions about it, and one turned into what appeared to be a drawing pin, and its owner looked at it in genuine puzzlement. Harry looked at his match. He thought about what Odin had told him about change, not the mechanics, the philosophy. Nothing becomes something else without passing through the space between. Every transformation is a small death. You have to mean the new thing, absolutely. It had been about something else entirely at the time, something to do with wars and the price of them. But it applied here in this smaller room with this smaller thing. He meant the needle. The match became a needle. Not an approximation of one, a perfect one, cold and exact, the eye sharp and clear, catching the candlelight. Harry set it on the desk. McGonagall was at the front of the room. Her head came up the way a predator's head comes up when something moves in peripheral vision. She walked down the aisle between desks at a measured pace, looking at various students' attempts, a murmur of encouragement here, a correction there, and arrived at Harry's desk. She looked at the needle. She picked it up. She held it to the light. She set it back down. Then she looked at Harry with the penetrating directness that was, he was learning, her default mode of inquiry. "Mr. Potter," she said, "have you done transfiguration before?" "No, Professor, but you've done other transformative magic." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Harry said. "What tradition?" "Sather mostly," Harry said, "with some self-directed study in human magical theory." The class had gone fairly quiet in the specific way of rooms, where everyone is pretending to still be focused on their own work. McGonagall absorbed the word Sather with the expression of a woman who has taught for 40 years and has nonetheless encountered a sentence she didn't anticipate. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him, not unkindly, not with suspicion, but with the focused attention of someone reassessing the parameters of a problem they thought they understood. "We'll speak after class," she said. "Of course," Harry said. He went back to making needles. He made 6 of them, each one a fraction more precise than the last, because the discipline was the point. After class, she asked him who had taught him. He explained, in the way he'd been explaining all week, honest, minimal, offering the true version of events without volunteering specifics that would invite further questions he wasn't ready to answer. His family was not wizarding. They had access to a very old magical tradition. He'd been practicing for years. "Your guardian," McGonagall said. This person they had access to Norse magical practice. "He is very old," Harry said simply. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. "You're not going to tell me more than that." "Not today," Harry said. "But I will eventually if you ask the right question." She held his gaze. Then something shifted in her expression, not softness exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement, a readjustment. She had been expecting, he understood, something fragile, something that needed protection. The boy who grew up suffering, who arrived at Hogwarts as a kind of rescue narrative. What she had was something else. "You'll find some of the classwork easy," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'd ask you not to make it difficult for the other students," she said, "not to diminish their effort by making it look effortless." "I'll be careful," Harry said. "Good." She turned back to her desk, then without looking at him, "Your matched needle was exceptional. The eye was perfectly formed. Most adult witches and wizards would have left it closed." He heard what was under that. "I've noticed. I'm watching, and I am not alarmed," and it was the closest thing to a vote of confidence that Minerva McGonagall apparently gave on short acquaintance. He took it. Thursday evenings, the first years had double potions. The dungeons were cold in the specific way of underground spaces that had never been designed with comfort in mind, and Severus Snape was cold in the way of a man who had made a considered philosophical decision about warmth and come down firmly against it. He arrived in the potions classroom the way weather arrives. Before you've fully registered the change, you're already in the middle of it. Robes black, hair dark and severe, moving through the room with the unhurried precision of someone who owned every space they occupied. He looked at the class. His gaze crossed Harry with the same calculation Harry had seen on every face this week, and on Snape's face it was more layered, more complicated, more carefully controlled than on any other. There was something personal in it, something compressed into very small dimensions behind those eyes. "Potter," he said. "Professor," Harry said. Snape's eyes narrowed fractionally. He had expected something different from the address. Harry had said it without deference and without challenge, simply as the correct word for the person in front of him. "Our new celebrity," Snape said. Harry said nothing. Snape moved to the front of the room and began. He asked questions that were designed to reveal ignorance, the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane, the uses of a bezoar, what you'd get if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood. The questions flew over the heads of most of the class, and Hermione's hand went up for all of them with the relentless optimism of someone who has not yet learned that sometimes not answering is the answer. "Monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant," Harry said, when Snape landed on him. "Aconitum, the bezoar's a stone from a goat's stomach, works as a general antidote for most poisons. Asphodel to wormhood makes draught of living death, which is a sleeping draught of significant potency." A pause. Snape looked at him. "Did you read that in a book?" Snape said, and the question had something in it beyond the words. "Most of it," Harry said. "The asphodel and wormhood I know from a different context." "What context?" "Funerary tradition," Harry said. "In Norse mythology, asphodel grows in the underworld and wormhood marks the passage between realms." He met Snape's eyes. "The draught of living death mimics that passage. It's named accurately." The dungeon was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment. "Open your books to page 14, he said to the class. Potions proved to be genuinely interesting, which Harry had half expected from the reading, but hadn't been entirely sure of until he was standing over a cauldron watching what happened when you combined particular substances and gave the process your absolute attention. It was chemistry and intention in equal parts, the kind of discipline that rewarded precision without forgiving sloppiness, which suited him well. His boil cure potion was correct. He knew it was correct from the color, the precise shade of clear, warm ochre that the book described, and from the way it moved when he stirred it, slow and even, without the slightly gluey consistency that meant overreduction. Snape came to stand at his shoulder without comment. He looked at the potion. He looked at Harry. "Where did you learn to stir?" he said, quietly enough that only Harry heard it. "My grandmother taught me to make food," Harry said. "She said patience with a pot was patience with everything." Snape was quiet for a moment. Then he moved on. It was not praise, it was not warm, but it was, Harry understood, a man recalibrating, and in this case that was worth more than praise. On Saturday morning, Harry found the library. He had known it was there. He'd walked past it 3 times already, but the first week had been about people in classrooms and the general geography of survival. Saturday was for something more specific. The library was large and labyrinthine and smelled of old paper in a way that was deeply, immediately familiar. It was the same smell as Odin's study, as the great archive rooms of the palace, as every room where important things had been written down and kept. He felt at home in it instantly. Hermione was already there. She was at a table near the window with 4 books open around her, a notepad covered in close handwriting, and the focused intensity of someone who had been there long enough that her tea had gone cold and she hadn't noticed. She looked up when he sat across from her, not with surprise. She'd heard him coming, he thought, even if she hadn't visibly reacted. "I wondered when you'd come here," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been observing everything all week and filing it away and now you need a place to organize it," she said. "What are you looking for?" Harry considered her. "The history of Hogwarts," he said. "Specifically, wards, protections, what's been put in place over the centuries and why." Hermione's eyes did the thing, the slight widening, the quick calculation. "The 3rd-floor corridor," she said. Harry said nothing. "McGonagall told us it was forbidden on pain of death," Hermione said, "which is not something you say to 11-year-olds unless you genuinely mean it, which means whatever is up there is genuinely dangerous, which means someone put it there and it's probably guarded." She paused. "And our defense professor makes your face go still when you look at him." Harry looked at her. "I notice things too," she said without heat. "I know you do," Harry said. "Are you going to tell me what you think is going on?" He thought about Odin's rule, understand it fully before you move against it. And then he thought about Loki's addendum, which was but share your map with one other person you trust, because blind spots are always where they get you. He was quiet for a moment. "Something is living in Quirrell's turban," he said. Hermione stared at him. "What?" "Not literally in the fabric, on his person, something using him." Harry kept his voice even, just above a murmur. The nearest other student was 6 tables away. "It's a presence, an old one. I can feel it when I'm in the same room. There's a temperature to it, cold at the edges. And his hand stops shaking when it surfaces, which means it's the one in control, and the shaking is what happens when Quirrell reasserts himself." Hermione had gone very still. "You're saying a dark entity is possessing our defense against the dark arts professor?" "Yes. Who is it?" Harry held her gaze. "Oh," she said quietly. Then after a moment, "You're certain?" "Enough to be careful," Harry said. "Not enough to move yet." "Move," she repeated. "What does that mean, move?" "It means when I understand what it wants well enough to stop it getting it," Harry said. "I'll stop it." He said it the same way he said most things, not dramatically, not with weight, just as the next sentence in a conversation, which somehow made it more substantial than if he'd said it dramatically. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. She was looking at him the way she'd been looking at him since the train, with that combination of fascination and recalibration, always updating her estimate. "You're not scared," she said. "I'm cautious," Harry said. "Those aren't the same thing. Most 11-year-olds would be terrified." "I'm not most 11-year-olds," Harry said. "No," Hermione said slowly. "You really aren't." She looked back at her books. Then, with the practicality of someone who has decided on a position and is immediately working within it, "The ward history will be in Hogwarts. A history, which I have, 3rd edition, which is the most complete. What specifically are you looking for in the protections?" "What's been added recently?" Harry said. "In the last year." Hermione nodded, pulled the book toward her, and began to search. They worked for 3 hours. The library filled and emptied around them. Hermione found 2 references to a new security installation in the restricted areas that had been commissioned by Dumbledore in the summer, the details of which were, deliberately, she noted, absent from every accessible source. They found a brief reference in a history of the school's previous encounters with dark artifacts that mentioned a security protocol involving multiple enchantments of different traditions, presumably to prevent any one person with knowledge of one tradition from defeating them all. "Multiple enchantments," Harry said. "A gauntlet," Hermione said. "Different professors, presumably. Flitwick McGonagall, probably Snape, though I don't know what his would be." She paused. "Whoever got through them would need to know several different magical disciplines, or have several different people," Harry said. Hermione looked at him over the book. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, and went back to reading. Ron found them at lunch, slid into the seat beside Harry with his usual comfortable lack of ceremony, and spent 30 seconds reading their expressions. "Right," Ron said. "What have you 2 been doing in the library that's made you both look like that?" Like what? Hermione said. Like you've worked something out that you're not sure whether to be excited or worried about, Ron said, with the matter-of-fact accuracy of someone who had grown up in a very large family and had therefore developed highly refined threat assessment instincts. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. We'll tell you later, Harry said. Tell me now, Ron said. Eat your lunch, Harry said. I can eat and listen, Ron said, demonstrating this immediately. The night of the first flying lesson, Neville broke his wrist. Not during the flying itself, before the flying, during the waiting, when Madame Hooch had gone inside to take Neville to the hospital wing and left 11 first-years standing in a field with broomsticks. Draco Malfoy had picked up the Remembrall that Neville had dropped when he fell. It had rolled under a broom and skittered into the grass, and was holding it at the height of insufferable, with the expression of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and was enjoying himself. I'll give it back, Malfoy said, spinning the glass ball in his fingers, when I feel like it. He looked around at the assembled first-years with the cheerful meanness of someone who has identified that power is available and has picked it up. Maybe I'll put it up in a tree. Harry walked over, not quickly, not with any particular visible intent. He just walked across the grass until he was standing in front of Malfoy, in easy arm's reach, and Malfoy looked at him, and the cheerful expression shifted into something more calculating. Potter, Malfoy said. Give it back, Harry said. Or what? Malfoy said, because he was 11 and this was the script, and the script required an or what. Harry looked at him, not with anger, with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it. There was something in the quality of Harry's stillness that Malfoy, who was perceptive in the way that self-interested people often are, had noticed since the first meeting on the train. A stillness that wasn't passivity, the way deep water is still. Give it back, Harry said again. And something in his voice in those 3 words was different from the first time he'd said them. Not louder, not harder, just more, the way a weight becomes more when you drop it. Malfoy held his gaze for 4 seconds. Then he tossed the Remembrall to Harry, who caught it without looking and turned away. That was boring, Malfoy said to his large companions in the tone of a man making the best of a situation. Harry walked back to where the pale, frightened boy named Neville had been watching from beside the brooms and put the Remembrall in his hand. He'll do that again, Neville said quietly. He was holding his wrist. It had a professional wrap on it now from the hospital wing, and looking at Harry with an expression Harry had difficulty categorizing for a moment and then recognized. It was the expression of someone who expected the world to be worse than it was and was consistently surprised when it wasn't. He might, Harry said. What will you do when he does? Neville blinked. I'm not very good at confrontation. You don't have to be good at confrontation, Harry said. You just have to decide that your things are yours. He handed Neville his broom. Now, let's see if you can fly. Neville could not, as it turned out, fly with any particular enthusiasm or skill, but he got off the ground and stayed there for the length of the lesson without incident, which Harry counted as a victory and said so, and which made Neville's expression do the unguarded thing again. After the lesson, Hermione walked beside Harry back toward the castle. You could have embarrassed him, she said. Malfoy, you had every reason and more. I know, Harry said. Why didn't you? Harry thought about what Loki had taught him, in 100 different lessons that were all really the same lesson. The cruelest thing you can do to someone who needs an audience is refuse to be won. The most complete victory is the one where the other person doesn't have a move left and knows it, because making him small in front of everyone he wanted to impress would have made him desperate, Harry said, and desperate people do stupid things. He glanced at her. I'd rather he be cautious of me than angry at me. It's more useful. Hermione was quiet for a moment. That's very cold, she said. Not with disapproval, with the specific fascination of someone learning a language they've never encountered before. It's practical, Harry said. Who taught you to think like that? Harry considered several possible answers and settled on the most honest one. An uncle, he said, who has very strong opinions about the difference between winning a fight and winning a war. Sunday morning, Harry wrote letters. He did this at the small desk in the corner of the dormitory, while the other boys were still asleep, in the pale early light with Hedwig, the owl Hagrid had given him in Diagon Alley, white and enormous and possessed of a dignified intelligence that Harry had immediately liked, perched on the bedpost and watching him with the polite interest of someone who knows the letter is coming. He wrote to Odin first, not about Voldemort, not yet. He needed more before he wrote about that. He wrote about the castle, about the wards, about the way the magic here felt old and layered and maintained rather than ambient. He wrote about McGonagall and Flitwick and Snape, about the quality of teaching, about what they expected and what the reality was. He wrote about Ron and Hermione in terms that were minimal and accurate. He wrote about Quirrell in 2 careful sentences that said everything without naming it, in the cipher he and Odin used for significant things. The threat you warned me of is already present. It is inside the school. I am watching. Odin would read those sentences and know exactly what they meant. He would not panic. He would not immediately send Thor through the Bifrost, which was the most important outcome because Thor through the Bifrost would solve the immediate problem and approximately 14 others in a manner that was comprehensive and irreversible, and would leave the wizarding world in a state that would take decades to explain. He wrote to Loki next, shorter, different tone. The hat sorted me in under a minute. The school is interesting. The Dada teacher is not what he appears. You would see it immediately. I have made 2 friends. One is the most prepared person I've ever met except for you, and the other is the most uncomplicated person I've ever met, which I mean as a compliment to both of them. Tell Thor I haven't burned anything down yet. Tell grandmother I've eaten properly. Don't read this letter to Odin. I'll tell him the important parts myself. He wrote to Frigga last. Her letter was the longest. It described the great hall ceiling on the first night, the specific quality of the candlelight on the lake during the crossing, the way Neville Longbottom's face had looked when the feather rose, the parts that were worth saying that he couldn't say to Odin and wouldn't say to Loki. He gave all 3 to Hedwig, who looked at them with the expression of someone who had been asked to do a great deal, but considered herself professionally equal to the task. Third one last, Harry said. She'll want time with it. Hedwig regarded him for a moment. Then she took off out the window into the gray morning sky with the unhurried power of something completely certain of its direction. Harry watched her go. In the next bed, Ron was beginning to stir, the early stages of waking that involved significant objection to the continued existence of morning. Harry turned from the window and looked at his desk, at the blank page that was left. He picked up his quill. He wrote in plain English rather than cipher because this one wasn't strategic. It was something else. I think about what this school would have been if you hadn't taken me. I think about what I would have been. I don't know the answer to either question with any precision, but I know that arriving here knowing what I know and being what I am, I think that matters. I think that was the point. I know you know I know that. I'm writing it anyway because some things should be said out loud, even when everyone already knows them. He looked at what he'd written. He folded it separately. He would have Hedwig take it on her next trip. He didn't know exactly why he'd felt the need to write it tonight, in this room, in this school that smelled of old magic and centuries of intention. Except that he did know. He was in the place his parents had been, the place his mother had walked, and his father, in the years before the night that ended with a scar on his forehead and an old man carrying him across the 9 realms. The magic of Hogwarts had recognized him when he walked through its gates. He'd felt it, a vibration in the stones underfoot, the kind that said, "We know you, we've been waiting." It was his world in a way Asgard was not, and Asgard was his world in a way this was not. And he was in the space between the 2 truths and finding it, unexpectedly, genuinely, fine, more than fine, good, he was good. Ron sat up and looked at him with the dignity of someone who had not been asleep for at least 30 seconds. Are you always up before everyone else? Usually, Harry said. That's genuinely troubling, Ron said with feeling. You want to go down for breakfast? Yeah, Harry said, let's go. He pocketed the letter and followed Ron out into the corridor, and the castle was warm and vast around them. And somewhere on the 2nd floor, a ghost was having the same argument it always had with the ghost on the 1st floor. And in the great hall, the ceiling was showing a clear early sky. And somewhere underneath, the 3rd floor corridor, something was guarded and waiting and patient, and Harry would deal with it in time. He knew he would. He had been raised by a man who understood patience as a form of power and waiting as a form of readiness. He wasn't afraid. He was, in every sense that mattered, exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4. What hunts in the dark. October arrived at Hogwarts the way October always does in Scotland, suddenly, completely, as if summer had simply lost an argument and packed its things overnight. The trees along the lakeshore went copper and gold, and the mornings developed a bite that made the walk to the greenhouses genuinely unpleasant, which Professor Sprout managed to offset by being the most enthusiastically warm person Harry had encountered at Hogwarts so far, a woman who treated every plant like a personality, and every student like someone capable of understanding that personality if they paid sufficient attention. Harry paid sufficient attention. He found herbology calming in the same way he'd found the lower training yards of Asgard calming, something physical and purposeful, your hands in it, results you could see. Neville, who had been quietly catastrophic in almost every other class in ways that mystified him more than anyone else, turned out to be startlingly gifted with plants. His hands knew things about growing things that the rest of him hadn't caught up to yet. Harry pointed this out to him directly, which caused Neville's usual startled gratitude, and then told him to stop being surprised by his own competence, which caused Neville to think about that for several days in visible installments. Ron had found his footing in the first month the way Ron found most things, not through strategy, but through the accumulated warmth of simply being himself at high volume consistently. People liked Ron. They liked him the way you like a fire that's in the right place, useful, reliable, genuinely warm rather than performing warmth. The twins, Fred and George, had already made a ceremonial visit to the first-year Gryffindor table to inspect him and declared Harry completely mental but probably fine based on criteria they declined to share. And Ron had told them to shut up and then immediately asked Harry if he wanted to play Exploding Snap later, with a total absence of self-consciousness that Harry found consistently refreshing. Hermione had relaxed. Not entirely, she was constitutionally incapable of entirely relaxing, which Harry understood because it was also true of him, just expressed differently. But she had stopped performing her preparedness at the class and started simply being prepared, which was a more comfortable version of the same quality, and one that Harry had pointed out to her without ceremony one afternoon in the library, when she'd spent 10 minutes explaining to him something he already knew. She'd gone quiet for a moment, and then said, "Am I being insufferable?" And Harry had said, "No, you're being nervous and translating it into information, which is understandable but unnecessary with me." She'd looked at him for a long moment and then gone back to her book, and something between them had settled into a different shape after that, less performance, more just the two of them in a room thinking about hard things. He'd sent the letter to Odin, the two-sentence one about Quirrell. The reply came 6 days later, by a raven that was considerably larger than the owls the other students received, and that landed on the Gryffindor table at breakfast, with the absolute confidence of something that had never once considered the possibility that it was not welcome. It dropped a sealed scroll beside Harry's plate, regarded the assembled first-years with dignified indifference, stole a piece of bacon from Ron's plate. Ron, to his credit, said nothing, just watched it happen and left through the window. The scroll was sealed with black wax marked with the symbol of the Allfather. Harry broke it without drama and read it under the table. 2 sentences back. "I know what it is. Do not face it alone." Harry folded the scroll and ate his eggs. "What did it say?" Ron asked. "That I should be careful," Harry said. "Of what?" He didn't specify, Harry said, which was technically true. Hermione was watching him over the rim of her pumpkin juice with the particular expression she reserved for things she had already half figured out and was waiting for confirmation of. He met her eyes and gave her a very small nod. Later, that nod said, she went back to her breakfast. The week before Halloween, Harry started going to the third-floor corridor at night. Not inside it, past it, alongside it, getting a sense of the shape of whatever was behind the locked door at the far end. He went alone the first 2 times, in the small hours when the castle had gone quiet and the portraits were dozing and the moving staircases were doing whatever staircases do when no one needs them. He moved without a lamp, without a charm, in the specific not quite invisibility he'd learned from Loki, not a true glamour, just a redistribution of attention, making himself the kind of thing a sleeping portrait's dream chose not to include. The door at the end of the third-floor corridor was locked, several times locked. He could feel the layers of enchantment from 6 feet away, Flitwick's work in the lock itself, precise and layered, and something heavier in the door, something with McGonagall's particular signature of intention. And underneath those, further down, not on the door but through it, the wild protective snarl of something alive, something large, something that was not asleep even at 3 in the morning. 3 heads, he thought, had to be, Cerberus or the wizarding world's equivalent, something old enough to need 3 minds to maintain watchfulness, but it wasn't what he was there to feel. He stood in the corridor with his eyes closed and reached out with the ambient sense that 9 years of Asgardian air had built into him, the sensory equivalent of what Odin called the long sight, not vision, more like weather sense, the ability to feel the shape of a thing's intention from a distance. And underneath the creature, underneath the door, through the castle's own deep foundations, something dark and cold and waiting, not a person, not a presence like Quirrell's turban exactly but related to it, an artifact, something contained and powerful and wanting. He opened his eyes, he went back to bed. The 3rd time he went, Hermione was in the corridor ahead of him. She was standing 6 feet from the door with her wand drawn and a spell on her lips that she canceled when she heard him because she recognized his footstep, which meant she'd been paying more attention to how he moved than he'd realized, and he filed that away as information about Hermione rather than a security problem. "You could have told me you were coming here," she said very quietly. "I could say the same," Harry said. "I figured it out from Hogwarts, a history," she said. "The new security installation, the third floor, I wanted to see what I could feel from outside it." She looked at the door. "There's something alive in there. Three-headed dog," Harry said. "Or something like it. You can feel that from here." "I can feel the shape of its attention," Harry said. "Three independent patterns, slightly out of sync with each other." Hermione stared at him for a moment. "Then what's under it?" "Something it's guarding," Harry said. "Old, powerful, wanted. By Quirrell." "By what's using Quirrell?" Harry said. He looked at the door. "He hasn't made a move toward it yet. He's building towards something, gathering information, probing the wards. Whatever he needs to get through them, he doesn't have yet." "Which means we have time," Hermione said. "Which means we have time," Harry agreed. "Come on, we'll freeze if we stay here." They went back through the corridor in silence, past a sleeping portrait of a witch in a tall hat who was snoring with the commitment of someone who had decided sleep was a full-time occupation, down the staircase that was considering moving but ultimately didn't. At the foot of the stairs, Hermione stopped. "Harry," she said. He looked at her. "When the time comes," she said, "when you move against it." A pause, choosing words. "You're not going to do it alone just because you can, are you?" Harry looked at her steadily. "No," he said, and meant it. She nodded once, satisfied in the way of someone who wanted a specific answer and received it. Good night." "Good night," Harry said, and watched her go up the stairs, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the empty entrance hall before going back to bed himself. Halloween hit the castle like a party that had been building for a month. The Great Hall transformed in the way the Great Hall apparently always transformed for Halloween, hundreds of real candles floating inside carved pumpkins that lined the tables and ceiling, the kind of decorative ambition that suggested someone with genuine artistic vision and a complete disregard for health and safety in the Muggle sense. Bats moved through the upper air, real ones, navigating the candlelight with the cheerful expertise of animals who had clearly made this agreement with the castle years ago and found it mutually satisfactory. The feast was enormous. Harry ate with the philosophical appreciation of someone raised on Asgardian feast culture, which meant he recognized quality without being overwhelmed by quantity. Ron ate with the straightforward intensity of someone who understood that good food was good food and anything else was overthinking. Hermione ate slightly less than she should have because she was reading under the table, which Harry had stopped commenting on because it had no effect. The troll walked in at 7:43. Harry knew it was a troll before he saw it because he smelled it first, the deep, wet, animal smell of something very large that had never once prioritized personal hygiene, undercut with the specific mineral smell of stone dust and cave mud and the kind of darkness that exists 50 feet underground. The smell hit him like a wall while people were still reaching for dessert, and he was already standing when the dungeon doors burst open and Professor Quirrell ran in. "Troll!" Quirrell screamed, with the wide-eyed hysteria of a man giving a very committed performance. "In the dungeons, thought you should know," he feinted. It was an excellent feint. Harry watched it with the professional appreciation of someone who had watched Loki perform considerably more elaborate collapses for considerably higher stakes. The Great Hall went up in the kind of noise that happens when 300 children are all frightened simultaneously, the specific frequency of collective panic, high and jagged and self-reinforcing. Dumbledore was on his feet immediately, voice carrying through the chaos like a hand placed firmly on a shoulder. "Prefects, lead your houses to the dormitories. Teachers, follow me." Harry was moving through the crowd before Dumbledore finished the sentence, "not toward the dormitories." Ron caught up with him at the door because Ron had been watching him with the instinctive attunement of someone who has learned that Harry's movements are worth following. "Where are you going?" "Hermione," Harry said. Ron stopped. "What? She's not in the hall," Harry said. "She's been in the bathroom on the second floor for the last 2 hours. He said it without slowing, turning into the corridor that led to the main stairs. "She didn't know about the troll." "How do you know she's in?" "Because she didn't come down to dinner, and she always comes down to dinner unless she's upset, and she was upset when she left the common room because Parvati said she was a nightmare, and she's not a nightmare, she's just." "How do you know all that?" Ron said, at a run now, keeping pace. "I pay attention," Harry said. He took the stairs 2 at a time. "Keep up." They found the troll on the second-floor corridor, which was both worse and better than finding it anywhere else. Worse because the bathroom was on the second-floor corridor. Better because Harry now knew exactly where it was going. The smell was overwhelming up here, close and immediate. The troll was enormous, 12 feet of pale gray muscle and stupidity, holding a club the size of a young tree, moving through the corridor with the specific destruction of something that had no concept of its own dimensions. It had just turned into the bathroom corridor. "Hermione," Harry said, and he was running. He came around the corner and through the bathroom door in the same motion, and found Hermione backed against the far wall of the bathroom, sinks along one side and stalls along the other, the troll filling the doorway behind him. It had turned at the noise of his entry, which was good. It had turned away from Hermione, which was very good. "Harry," Hermione said. "Against the back wall," Harry said. "All the way now," she went. The troll turned back to face him. It blinked with the slow, unhurried blink of something that has never in its life been surprised by another creature. It raised its club. Harry raised his wand. He hadn't planned this as a wand situation. His instinct in the first half-second had been something considerably older than a wand, which was part of why he'd paused for a half-second. Odin's voice in his head, always. Wisdom before strength. He was in a school. He was surrounded by people who would ask questions about what had happened to a troll. The answers to those questions needed to exist within a framework that the wizarding world could parse. So, wand. "Wingardium Leviosa," Harry said, perfectly enunciated, wrist precisely level. The club rose out of the troll's hand. It rose fast. Harry had not been gentle about it, and the troll looked up at its club with an expression of profound philosophical confusion, the look of a creature encountering a category of problem it had never developed tools for. Then the club reached the apex of its rise, right at ceiling height, and Harry stopped lifting it and let it stay there for just a moment, and the troll reached up after it, standing on its toes, still confused. "Down," Harry said, which wasn't the incantation for anything but was the word he meant. The club came down on the troll's head with a sound like a very large book falling on a very hard floor, and the troll went down with it, boneless, horizontal, shaking the floor of the bathroom with an impact that knocked grout dust from between the tiles and sent a ripple through the standing water that had pooled from a sink the troll had knocked loose. "Silence," the troll snored. Ron, who had appeared in the bathroom doorway midway through the club's ascent and had gone extremely still, looked at the unconscious troll, then at Harry, then at Hermione, then back at Harry. 30 seconds, Ron said. "Fewer than that," Harry said. "You were gone 30 seconds, Ron said. 30 seconds from the door to," he gestured at 12 feet of unconscious gray muscle. "The club was already in its hand," Harry said. "It was mostly the club." "It was not mostly the club," Ron said, with the precision of someone who intends to be accurate about this for historical purposes. Hermione had come away from the wall. She walked across the bathroom to where Harry was standing and looked at the troll, which was snoring with the deep, resonant unconsciousness of something that was not going to be a problem for the foreseeable future. She looked at him. "Are you all right?" she said. "I'm fine," Harry said. "You ran in here," she said, and something in her voice was doing something complicated that she was visibly not entirely comfortable with. "Into a bathroom with a troll, for me." "We ran," Ron said from the doorway. "I ran too. I was right behind him." "You were behind the door when the club went up," Hermione said. "I was at the door," Ron said, strategically positioned. "We should go," Harry said, because the sound of footsteps was already coming down the corridor. Multiple sets, fast, the specific rhythm of teachers who have been told where and have come directly. McGonagall arrived first, Flitwick and Quirrell behind her. McGonagall took in the scene with the speed and thoroughness of someone who had been processing emergency situations for 40 years, the unconscious troll the 3 first years, the wand in Harry's hand, the sink knocked sideways, the grout dust. "What," she said, "happened here?" Ron started to speak. Hermione started to speak. Both of them glanced at Harry, who said nothing and waited. "The troll came in while I was here," Hermione said, finding her thread. "Harry and Ron came to find me because I didn't know about it. Harry used Wingardium Leviosa on the club." McGonagall looked at the troll, looked at Harry. "Wingardium Leviosa," she said. "Yes, Professor," Harry said. "That troll weighs approximately 1,000 pounds, Mr. Potter." "The club weighed less than the troll," Harry said. "I only had to lift the club." McGonagall was quiet for a moment in the specific way she went quiet when she was deciding something. 5 points each to Gryffindor," she said, "for sheer nerve. Miss Granger, you should not be wandering the school on Halloween. 10 points from Gryffindor." She looked at Harry once more with that recalibrating expression. "Well done." She turned away. Harry looked at Quirrell, who was standing just behind Flitwick in the doorway. Quirrell was looking at the troll, not with relief. He was performing relief, but the hands were still, and the eyes underneath the performance had the flat, cold quality of whatever lived behind them making a calculation. The troll was not what it appeared. Nothing about tonight was coincidence. A distraction, then, something Quirrell had orchestrated, probably to access something elsewhere in the school while the teachers were occupied. Harry looked at Quirrell with the patient, complete attention that Odin had spent years training him to hold without showing. Quirrell looked up and met his eyes. 1 second, 2, then Quirrell flinched. An involuntary animal flinch, not from Harry's expression, which was neutral, but from something else. Something that happened when the cold presence behind Quirrell's eyes made contact with whatever it was that Harry carried in his skin, in his bones, after 9 years of breathing Asgard. The cold presence had recognized something. Harry held Quirrell's gaze for 1 more second, then looked away first, deliberately, the way you look away from a fire to demonstrate that it doesn't dazzle you rather than because it doesn't. Flitwick was saying something to the troll with his wand out, binding charms probably, and Ron was recounting the events to no one in particular with the dramatic energy of someone who had just acquired a very good story and intended to use it, and Hermione was standing at Harry's shoulder, and he was fairly certain she'd seen the moment with Quirrell because she was a person who saw things. He didn't look at her. Later in the common room, Ron retelling the story to the fire with the embellishment that naturally accrues to stories when they pass through Ron, Harry sat apart with a cup of something warm and thought about what the flinch meant. It meant Quirrell, or what was in Quirrell, was afraid of him. Not afraid in the way of an intelligent person who has assessed a threat and is being sensible about it. Afraid in the older, more animal sense. The way of fire is afraid of water, not strategically, not with planning, just an immediate, involuntary recoil. That was interesting. That was very interesting. He thought about his mother's magic, sitting over him like armor, the protection she'd laid down in Godric's Hollow, the shield that had broken the killing curse and driven whatever was in Quirrell's head out of a physical body for a decade. It would still be there. It would be in his skin, would have grown with him, reinforced over years of living rather than diminishing. When Voldemort's remnant looked at Harry, it was looking at the thing that had destroyed it. He couldn't be touched, not directly. Whatever was in Quirrell could not touch him without burning. Harry sat with this for a long time, turning it over, feeling the shape of it the way you feel the edge of a new tool to understand what it's good for. Then he thought about Odin's letter. Do not face it alone. Not you cannot face it. Odin would not have said something he didn't believe to be true. Do not face it alone. A distinction. An instruction, not a warning about capability. He looked across the common room at Ron, who was now acting out the troll's expression of confusion for an increasingly large and delighted audience, both arms raised in mock bewilderment. He looked at Hermione, who had settled in the armchair nearest the fire with a book open in her lap, but was watching Ron's performance with a small, private smile that she was not quite managing to suppress. He thought about what Loki had told him once, during a lesson that had started as strategy and ended as something more. The lone actor in a story is always the tragedy, Loki had said. The actor with companions is always the adventure. Know which story you're in. Harry set down his cup. He stood up and walked across the common room and sat on the floor between Ron's performance and Hermione's armchair, and Hermione looked down at him from the chair, and something in her expression said she knew he'd made a decision and was waiting to find out what it was. Tomorrow, Harry said quietly, the 3 of us, I need to tell you what I think is at the end of the 3rd floor corridor and what I think Quirrell is after. Hermione closed her book. I knew tonight wasn't an accident, she said. No, Harry said, the troll was a distraction. Yes, he didn't get to it tonight, she said. Whatever's down there stopped him. The dog, Harry said, and the other enchantments. He doesn't have what he needs yet. Ron had noticed they'd gone quiet and had ended his performance mid-troll and come over, sitting on the floor beside Harry with the easy flexibility of a tall person who has made peace with floors. What are we talking about? Tomorrow, Harry said. You said that, Ron said. What about tonight? Tonight we sleep, Harry said. Quirrell didn't get what he wanted. We have time. How much time? Hermione said. Harry thought about the cold, calculating patience he'd felt behind Quirrell's eyes, the way it had been watching, gathering, building toward something with the long view of a creature that had been waiting for 10 years already. Enough, he said, not infinite. The week after Halloween, 2 things happened. The first, a letter from Loki arrived, carried by one of the Asgardian ravens, a different one this time, smaller, with the specific air of one who has been sent rather than chosen to come. The letter was short and written in the careful, ambiguous language Loki used when he thought someone else might read it, which meant it was simultaneously a casual update and a detailed tactical analysis if you knew how to read both layers. The casual layer said he'd been teaching a new class of practitioners some basic glamour theory and found them disappointingly literal-minded. The tactical layer said, the object you're circling is likely a philosopher's stone. Nicholas Flamel. Look him up, don't touch it. The stone gives immortality to whoever's holding it, and a spirit without a body wants a body more than anything. Take away its means of getting one before it makes its move. Harry read both layers, folded the letter, and went to find Hermione in the library. Nicholas Flamel, he said, sitting across from her. She looked up. I know that name. I've seen it somewhere. She was already pulling books. This was the thing about Hermione that Harry found genuinely wonderful, not just that she knew things, but that her first instinct when given a thread was always to pull it. No hesitation, no performance of thinking, just motion. It took her until the following morning. She appeared at breakfast while Harry and Ron were eating toast and placed a very large book open to a specific page between them with the satisfaction of someone delivering a completed thing. Nicholas Flamel, alchemist, born 1330, creator of the only known philosopher's stone, which produces the elixir of life, resides in Devon. 600 years old, Ron said, reading over Harry's shoulder with the toast still in his hand. 696, Hermione said. Is the stone at Hogwarts? Ron said. It was moved from Gringotts, Harry said. I read about the Gringotts break-in August in the Prophet. He looked at the entry. Someone tried to steal it before Dumbledore moved it to the school. Quirrell, Hermione said. Probably, Harry said, and failed, and then ended up at Hogwarts himself. He looked at the page. He's been here all term, building towards something. He knows the stone is here. He needs to get to it. Ron ate his toast in silence for a moment. So what do? We learn everything we can about what's protecting it, Harry said. Not from Quirrell, from everywhere else. The enchantments will be from different professors, Hermione said immediately. We know Flitwick and McGonagall's, we've felt them on the door. There'll be more once you're through. Something from Snape, probably, maybe others. Can we figure out what they are without going in? Ron said. I can work out Snape's, Hermione said, with the focused confidence of someone who had been paying close attention in potions for 10 weeks. He wouldn't use anything he hasn't taught, because that's how Snape works. He wants to be the answer to his own puzzle. What would that be? Harry said. Logic, she said immediately. A potions puzzle, something requiring reasoning rather than magic to solve. She paused. He doesn't respect anything that can be blundered through by luck or power. He'd make it something where brute force doesn't work. Harry looked at her. You've thought about this. I've thought about everything, she said without apology. The second thing that happened that week was smaller and private, and mattered in a way Harry would not have been able to explain efficiently. He was in the corridor outside the library on Thursday afternoon, books under his arm, when he passed a mirror, an ordinary standing mirror that had been pushed to one side of the corridor, half covered by a tapestry forgotten or stored. He would have walked past it without slowing, except that when he glanced at it reflexively, his reflection had company. He stopped. He stepped back in front of the mirror. His reflection looked back. And beside the reflection, not solid, not clear, not like a person actually present, but real enough that he held completely still, two figures. A woman with red hair and eyes exactly the shade and shape of his own. A man with dark hair and round spectacles perched at the exact angle that Harry's hair suggested had always been defiant of control. His parents. His mother's reflection hand was on his reflection's shoulder. His father's was on the other. They weren't doing anything. They were just there, present, warm, the quality of a fire in the next room. His mother's face was the most difficult. It was his face. He'd never seen that before. He looked at them for a long time. He thought about Odin, who had picked him up off a doorstep and carried him across the 9 realms. He thought about Frigga, who had told him stories and braided silver into his hair. He thought about Thor's hand on his shoulder, sealing an agreement. He thought about Loki teaching him to think sideways, the long afternoons, the genuine laughter that didn't feel like a lesson even when it was. He thought about the word father, which had always meant Odin, and which also now meant, standing in front of a corridor mirror in Hogwarts, something else as well. Something he hadn't lost so much as never held, and yet. His mother's reflected eyes were kind and warm, and looked at him the way his eyes looked at things he cared about, completely, without performance. He had her eyes. He stayed until the light in the corridor changed with the late afternoon, until he heard footsteps coming from the direction of the library, and then he pulled himself away and walked on. He didn't cry. He also didn't pretend he hadn't wanted to, which was the kind of honesty Odin had always required of him, and which was harder than not crying. The next morning he sat with Ron and Hermione at breakfast and told them everything. Everything about Quirrell. Everything about what he'd felt at the 3rd-floor corridor, and what Loki's letter had told him, and what his own sense of the thing in Quirrell's head meant. He told them about his mother's protection, and why it meant Voldemort could not touch him directly. He told them about what Odin had written and what it meant. Ron listened with the focused stillness of someone who had decided this was serious business and was treating it accordingly. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. "So the plan," Ron said, "is to figure out everything that's protecting the stone so that we know what Quirrell will have to get through so that we can stop him before he gets to it." "Yes," Harry said. "Not go to Dumbledore," Ron said, not argumentative, genuinely checking the reasoning. "I thought about it," Harry said. "Dumbledore knows the stone is being targeted. He put the protections there himself. If he hasn't moved it already, he's either waiting for something or watching for something." He paused. "I'm not convinced going to him changes what happens. I'm convinced we need to understand it ourselves, because when the moment comes, it might come fast and it might not give us time to get an adult." Ron nodded slowly. "Also," Hermione said, "Dumbledore left you on a cold doorstep when you were an infant and called it protection." She said it very calmly. "I'm not saying he's wrong to trust, but I think Harry has earned the right to be cautious about where he places that trust." Ron looked at her. Looked at Harry. "Right," he said, "so we figure it out ourselves. With Dumbledore as a backup," Harry said, "not a first move." "Deal," Ron said. He picked up his juice. "You know, most first years are worried about whether they can get the shrinking charm right before Christmas." "Can you get the shrinking charm right before Christmas?" Harry said. "Absolutely not," Ron said pleasantly. Harry looked at both of them across the breakfast table, Ron with his pumpkin juice and his easy certainty, Hermione with her book open but not being read, watching Harry with those too-alert eyes that missed nothing and forgot nothing. He thought about what the Sorting Hat had said. "Do not face it alone." Odin's letter and the hat were saying the same thing, which was not a coincidence but was a kind of confirmation. "Thank you," Harry said. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it the way he said important things, simply meaning it completely, not surrounding it with anything that would dilute it. Hermione went back to her book. Ron said obviously, as if there had never been any other possibility. The candles burned in the great hall, and the ceiling above them was October gray, and the castle breathed its old familiar breath around them. And somewhere on the third floor something slept with 3 heads, and somewhere in a turban something cold and ancient turned its attention slowly toward what it wanted, and Harry ate his breakfast with the patience of someone raised by the most patient man in the 9 realms, and waited for the right moment. It was coming. He could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather, before the evidence, before the clouds, in the quality of the light. It was coming, and he was ready. Chapter 5, The Scar Speaks. November came in gray and permanent, the kind of gray that stops being weather and becomes atmosphere, a quality of the light that suggested the sun had made a considered decision to reduce its involvement with Scotland until further notice. The lake was the color of old pewter. The ground smelled of mud and wood smoke. The staircases moved more on cold mornings, which Harry suspected was less structural and more temperamental. He didn't mind. He'd grown up in a place where the weather was a direct expression of whoever was feeling what, and rain was rain and cold was cold, and both could be moved through without complaint if you dressed for them and paid attention to where you put your feet. Quidditch season had opened. Harry had made the Gryffindor team in the second week of October, which would have been remarkable for a first year if the Seeker tryout hadn't proceeded the way it did. McGonagall had brought him to the pitch herself quietly, without announcement, because Oliver Wood had apparently spent 2 weeks trying to negotiate with her about whether a first year could be considered for the team, and she had said she would see and had then seen. Harry had mounted a school broom. School brooms were universally mediocre, the magical equivalent of a borrowed bicycle with 1 flat tire, and gone up. He'd been on flying horses. He'd watched Thor navigate aerial combat from the ramparts of Asgard's eastern towers. The broom felt like a toy. He flew it very well anyway, because the discipline was the point, and because making a school broom look brilliant was a more interesting problem than making a brilliant broom look brilliant. He caught the practice snitch in under 3 minutes, not because he was showy about it, but because once he'd located the thing he'd simply gone directly at it without hesitation or detour, which was apparently not how seekers usually approached it. Wood had looked at him afterward with the expression of a man who has just found his religion. "That," Wood said, "is exactly the seeker I've been asking for since second year. I'd like my own broom," Harry said. "Get your own broom," Wood agreed immediately. Harry had written to Frigga, who had specifically years ago said she would provide for things the school couldn't, and the Nimbus 2000 had arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by 4 owls because it was too large for one, causing a scene at the breakfast table that Harry had not planned on but that Ron had found thoroughly entertaining. The Nimbus was a genuinely excellent piece of engineering. Harry flew it in the early mornings before practice, alone on the pitch in the gray November light, getting the feel of it properly, the difference between his intentions and its responses, the play and the controls, the way it read weight distribution. He treated it the way he treated all new tools, with the unhurried respect of someone who understood that understanding something before using it in a crisis was not optional. Hermione had shown up at the pitch on the third morning, wrapped in her Gryffindor scarf with a book under her arm, and sat in the stands to watch. "You don't have to watch," Harry had said, landing. "I know," she'd said, and gone back to reading, and he'd gone back up, and they'd never discussed it again, and she'd been there every morning since. The first Quidditch match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin on a Saturday in November that was cold enough to make the breath visible, and the pitch slightly dangerous underfoot, which the Slytherin captain appeared to regard as a structural advantage, and the Gryffindor captain appeared to regard as an irrelevant variable. The stands were full. Harry had played in front of audiences before. In a different sense, Asgardian training exhibitions were not public events, exactly, but they were attended by enough people with enough opinions that the concept of observation under pressure was not foreign to him. He sat on his nimbus in the center of the pitch at the opening whistle with the same stillness he brought to everything, while around him the other players surged, and the bludgers were released, and the quaffle went up, and he rose above it all to begin his search. The Slytherin seeker was a fourth-year named Terrence Higgs, who was good, genuinely good, technically disciplined, with the efficient style of someone who had been well-trained. He positioned himself high and central, maintaining overview, which was the textbook approach. Harry positioned himself lower and to one side, which was not the textbook approach. He was not reading the pitch from above. He was reading the Slytherin seeker. Watching for the slight shift in body language that would happen before Higgs consciously registered the snitch, the fraction of attention that would move before the rest followed. It was the same principle as watching an opponent in a spar, waiting for the intention before the motion. The match lasted 22 minutes. Higgs moved first, a slight tightening, a drift to the east side of the pitch, and Harry was already moving before Higgs had registered why. He came in from below and to the left, the nimbus moving exactly as he intended because he'd spent 3 weeks learning it, and the snitch was there, spinning in a tight spiral near the Slytherin goal posts, gold against the gray sky, and Harry was reaching before Higgs had fully committed his body to the direction. His fingers closed around it. The whistle. The stands made the sound stands make, that specific, enormous surge of collective noise that is less like sound and more like weather. The Gryffindor section was on its feet. He could see, without looking for them, the exact locations of Ron and Hermione, because Ron was the loudest person in the section, and Hermione was standing on her seat, which was an action she would later deny. Harry landed and held the snitch up, and it was fine. It was just a game, but there was something in the clean satisfaction of having done something well that never got old. Not the winning, the execution, the intention matching the outcome. Wood grabbed him. The team grabbed him. Somewhere in the Slytherin section, Draco Malfoy was sitting with his arms folded, and the expression of someone revising a significant number of prior conclusions. What happened at the match changed things, and Harry needed 2 days to fully process how. He had been watching Quirrell in the stands throughout the game. A habit at this point, automatic, background, the same way he kept track of exits in a room. Quirrell had been watching the match from the staff section with the slightly removed quality of a man whose attention was never fully on the thing in front of him. At the 14-minute mark, Harry's broom had lurched, not the wind, not a bludger. The broom had developed a sudden, violent juddering, the kind that was not mechanical, the kind that came from interference, from a charm directed at the broom with the specific intent of destabilizing the rider. Harry had locked his legs and gone absolutely still and leaned into it, the way you lean into a horse that's spooking, not fighting the motion, moving with it, keeping your weight central, and the broom had continued to judder, but he had stayed on it. He'd looked at the staff section. Quirrell's lips were moving. Harry had looked at him directly. Quirrell had felt the look, had looked up from his muttered charm and met Harry's eyes at 50 feet across the pitch, and what happened in that half-second was not nothing. The cold presence, looking out through Quirrell's face, had looked at Harry, had looked at the scar, and the scar had answered, not with pain, with recognition. A deep, resonant vibration that started at the lightning bolt on his forehead and moved through the rest of him like a bell that's been struck, a frequency he felt in his molars and behind his eyes and all the way down his spine. The scar and what lived in Quirrell had once been the same thing, had once been part of the same moment, the moment his mother died. The moment the curse broke, the broom stopped juddering. Quirrell had looked away first. Later, 2 days later, sitting in the library with Hermione on one side and the collected Quidditch match analysis she'd apparently conducted from memory on the other, Harry told her what he'd felt. She listened without interruption, which was rare enough that he noticed it. He was doing a curse, she said, to unseat you. Yes, but you felt it through the scar, she said, not just saw him doing it. The scar knows him, Harry said, or knows what's in him. They made each other. He thought about how to explain it in terms that didn't require 10 years of context. When something made of dark power looks at the thing that destroyed it, there's a reaction. Both ways. He felt it too. He stopped, Hermione said. Because direct contact hurts him, Harry said. My mother's protection. He can't touch me. He can't even look at me directly for too long. Hermione was quiet, working this into her model of the situation. So he can't attack you personally. Not directly. He could use other means, she said. Indirect threats, other people, artifacts. Yes, Harry said, which is why I need to understand what he's building toward before he builds to it. He looked at the stack of books she had. What do you have? She spread them out with the efficiency of someone who had already organized her findings and was now presenting them in logical sequence. Fluffy, Ron had named the three-headed dog Fluffy on the basis that it made him feel better about the whole situation, and the name had stuck, was apparently a creature whose origins were Greek rather than Norse or British, which was interesting. He slept to music. That was his weakness, specific music, specific proximity, and he went down like something that had been waiting for permission to rest. Flute, Hermione said, pointing to a passage she'd marked. Simple melody. It's not the complexity that matters, it's the invitation of it. She paused. Someone who knows this could walk right past him. Quirrell knows this, Harry said. Almost certainly, but knowing the answer to one puzzle doesn't help with the rest of them. She turned to a different page. Devil's snare next, most likely. A plant that constricts. It stops if you produce light or heat. It hates both. After that, she hesitated. What? I don't know what comes after that, she said, and the admission clearly cost her something, because she said it the way you say things that are uncomfortable in your mouth. I've been trying to extrapolate from what we know about each professor's magical specialty and what kind of challenge would be both protective and solvable, but I'm working from incomplete information. Keys, Harry said. She looked at him. Flitwick's challenge, Harry said. Flying keys, probably. He'd make something elegant, something that moves, something where you have to identify the specific right answer among many wrong ones that all look similar. Flitwick appreciates precision. Hermione reached for her quill and wrote it down without questioning the logic, which told Harry she'd reached the same conclusion and was confirming it. That leaves Snape's, she said, which I've said is logic, a potions puzzle, and possibly something from Dumbledore himself at the end. Possibly, Harry said. You don't look worried about Dumbledore's, Hermione said, watching him. If Dumbledore's the last line of protection, Harry said, then whatever it is will be something worth stopping for. That's not a comforting answer, she said. No, Harry agreed. Ron appeared from around a bookshelf with a sandwich in one hand and the look of someone who had spent the morning productively elsewhere but had now arrived ready to contribute. He sat down, looked at the spread of books, and said chess with great confidence. They both looked at him. McGonagall's challenge, Ron said, has to be chess. It's the most like transfiguration. Both are about conversion, about seeing what pieces can become rather than what they are. And it'll be life-sized because McGonagall doesn't do things by halves. He took a bite of his sandwich. I'm quite good at chess. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. He's right, she said with the slightly impressed tone of someone recalibrating an estimate. I know I'm right, Ron said pleasantly. What's Snape's logic puzzle? Hermione said. Potions. Ron made a face that clearly communicated his personal relationship with logic puzzles under pressure, then squared his shoulders in the manner of someone accepting a commission they'd rather not have but intend to fulfill. Fine, what do we need to know about Fluffy? December arrived with the specific threat of examinations before the Christmas break, which redistributed everyone's anxieties into a new arrangement. The library filled, the common room filled. The sound of people reciting spells and formulae became the ambient soundtrack of every common room in every tower. Harry studied with the methodical discipline of someone who understood the difference between knowing a thing and being able to demonstrate knowing it under time pressure, which Odin had been drilling into him since he was 6 years old through the straightforward method of asking him questions about last week's stories at unexpected moments, until retrieving information quickly became structural rather than effortful. He also kept watching Quirrell. The defense professor had become more agitated in November. Not visibly, to a casual observer he was still just the nervous, stammering man he'd always been. But Harry had been calibrated to Quirrell's baseline for 3 months now, and the agitation was there in the frequency of the shaking, in the rate at which the cold presence surfaced behind the eyes. Something had changed, something was pressing. Harry considered this and wrote to Loki. The reply came 3 days before the Christmas break in a letter that occupied the casual layer entirely and the tactical layer very briefly, and the tactical layer said, he needs something other than the stone. The stone won't help him without a body. He needs a way to obtain a body first. Think about what's in the school that could give him one. Harry sat with that for a day. Then he went back to Hogwarts. A history, a different section, the chapter on the school's magical properties, the ambient enchantments, the way centuries of magical activity had saturated the very stonework. He read it with the ambient sense turned on, feeling his way through the text with the part of him that understood magic the old way. There was, buried in a footnote in a chapter about the school's history of magical accidents, a reference to a mirror. An ancient mirror, an artifact of significant power that had been moved into the school within the last year. The mirror of Arist, enchanted to show the viewer their deepest desire. Moved, the footnote said, to an undisclosed location within the school for safekeeping. Harry set the book down. The Philosopher's Stone, the mirror of Arist, the stone that gave life, the mirror that showed desire. If the stone were hidden inside the mirror, if it were visible only to someone who wanted to find it but not use it, then someone who desired only to possess the stone for personal use would see only themselves in it. But someone who wanted to find it and keep it safe would see themselves holding it, would see the stone, would reach for it. And the mirror would give it to them because that was what it desired. That was what desire itself was to the mirror, not the object, but the right desire. It was brilliant. It was the kind of brilliance that had Dumbledore's particular signature all over it, complex enough to look simple, elegant enough to feel inevitable, human enough to exploit the one thing dark magic systematically couldn't understand. Desire that wasn't selfish. Harry held this thought very carefully. Then he went to find the mirror. He found it on the 4th night of looking, in a disused classroom on the 3rd floor, not on the forbidden corridor but adjacent to it, in a room that smelled of old chalk and years of disuse. It was standing against the far wall, tall and ornate, the frame carved with words he identified immediately, because he'd spent his first year of education learning several dead languages at Odin's knee. Eris stra eruoit ube kafruoit on wosi. Reversed and rearranged, it said, I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it. He looked. His own reflection first, recognizable and immediate. Then beside him, as he'd expected after the corridor mirror, his parents. Lily and James Potter, clear and warm and real in the way that the mirror made things real. His mother's hand on his shoulder. His father standing close. And behind them, Odin. Not his reflection exactly. Odin in the mirror was not doing anything in particular, just present, the gray cloak, the staff, the one eye that held 10,000 years of everything, standing with Harry's parents as if they had always been in the same room. As if the distinction between the family he'd been born to and the family he'd been raised by was not a distinction the mirror found meaningful. Harry looked at this for a long time. He thought about what Dumbledore had designed this for. He understood it completely. The person who desired the stone for its power would see themselves using it, would reach for it, would not receive it. The person who desired only to find it and keep it from misuse would see themselves holding it, the completed good act, the ended threat, and the mirror would place it in their hand, and they would have it, and they would take it away, and the threat would be over. He reached into his pocket. His hand was warm. He looked at his reflection. The reflection reached into its pocket and withdrew a small stone, red and clear, that caught the mirror's light. The Philosopher's Stone. He could see it. His reflection was holding it, had his desire correctly, had the right kind of desire not to use it to end this. To take it somewhere Voldemort could never find it, to finish what his mother started. He felt the weight of the stone in his actual pocket before he looked down. He looked down. It was there. Warm and small and extraordinarily ordinary feeling for an object of its power, a polished red stone the size of a robin's egg. He closed his hand around it and felt nothing extraordinary. No rush, no temptation, no sudden desire for immortality. Just the satisfaction of having correctly understood a puzzle and the practical fact of having what needed to be kept safe. He put it in his pocket properly and stepped back from the mirror. You found it. The voice came from the doorway. Dumbledore was standing there. He was not in his usual elaborate robes. He was in something simpler, the clothes of a man who had been walking the school at night, checking on things. He looked at Harry with those half-moon spectacles, the blue eyes that Harry had read described as twinkling and found, now that he was looking at them directly, to be less twinkling and more measuring. Deeply, carefully measuring, with the weight of a man who had been making large calculations for a very long time. Harry held his gaze. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the mirror. Looked back at Harry. How long have you known about it? What's in the mirror? 3 days, Harry said. That quarrel was after something in this school, since September. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that was neither uncomfortable nor comfortable. It was the silence of a man taking a significant amount of information in without performing a reaction to it. Since September, he said. Since the sorting, Harry said. The hat told me something was living in Quirrell's turban. I confirmed it by the end of the first week. And you've told no one? I've told 2 people, Harry said. People I trust. I wrote to my grandfather, who confirmed what it was and told me not to face it alone. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. You designed the stone's protection specifically for someone who wanted to find it without wanting to use it. I did, Dumbledore said. And you designed it knowing someone might come for it this year, Harry said. And you left it here anyway, and you haven't removed Quirrell from the school. A pause. I have been watching Quirrell for some time, Dumbledore said carefully. You were using him as bait, Harry said, letting him get close enough to almost reach it. Watching who he contacted, what methods he used, what intelligence he was gathering. He watched Dumbledore's face. You wanted to know how much Voldemort knew before you moved. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in water. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once: surprise, reassessment, something that might have been the beginning of respect, and underneath it something else, something older and heavier, something that had to do with a doorstep in a cold November night 11 years ago. Your grandfather taught you well, Dumbledore said. My grandfather teaches me everything worth knowing, Harry said. With the exception of some things he leaves to my uncle, who fills in the gaps. May I ask who your grandfather is? Harry considered this. You already know, he said. You knew when you came to the Dursleyes' house. You knew when you walked away. He let that sit for exactly 1 moment. You saw him, didn't you? Dumbledore was very still. A traveler, Dumbledore said quietly. Across the street. I wasn't certain what I thought. He saw me on a doorstep, Harry said. He picked me up. He kept his voice even. No accusation in it. The same neutrality he used for everything that had more weight underneath than it had on the surface. He raised me. Dumbledore took his spectacles off, cleaned them, which Harry had learned was something people did when they needed time that couldn't be taken obviously, put them back on, looked at Harry. I made a decision, Dumbledore said. I believed at the time it was the right decision for the greatest number of people. I know, Harry said. I've been told that, and I believe you believed it. He held the stone in his closed fist in his pocket, warm and present. I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that. I'm also not going to pretend the decision was right just because you made it for good reasons. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You are very like your father, he said, and very like your mother. And also, he paused and something shifted in his expression, something that was private and honest. Something I don't have a category for. No, Harry said. I wouldn't think you would. He held out his hand, the stone in his palm between them. The stone needs to go somewhere safe, Harry said. Not here, not at Gringotts. Quirrell knew where it was at Gringotts, which means Voldemort knew. Somewhere he has no knowledge of and no reach. Dumbledore looked at the stone. Looked at Harry. Do you have somewhere in mind? I have somewhere in mind, Harry said. But I need your agreement that you'll destroy it afterward. It can't exist. Not as long as Voldemort exists in any form. You can't have immortality available and a spirit seeking it. That's not a stable situation. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. Nicholas will understand, he said finally, quietly. Nicholas is 696 years old, Harry said. He's had more life than anyone born naturally is ever given. He'll understand. Dumbledore took the stone from Harry's palm. Held it for a moment, looking at it with the expression of a very old man looking at something that has been significant for a very long time. Then he put it in his robes. I will arrange to send it somewhere permanent, he said. Good, Harry said. He started toward the door. Harry, Dumbledore said. He stopped, turned. Dumbledore was looking at him with both of those measuring eyes and something else underneath them, something that Harry recognized because Odin's eye sometimes held it, that quality of a person who has seen very far ahead and is not certain what they see. What I left on that doorstep, Dumbledore said. What I chose not to see in the darkness. A pause. I am glad he was there. Harry held his gaze. I know, he said. So am I. He went back to bed. The Christmas break emptied the castle. Most students went home. The great hall shrank to a single table near the fireplace for those who remained, a cozier arrangement that suited the season. Ron stayed. The borough was too full at Christmas for the Hogwarts contingent to join, he explained, which Harry suspected was less true than it was Ron's version of not wanting to leave, and Hermione stayed because her parents were traveling, and she'd elected to stay at school rather than join them, and Hermione's election about where to be tended to be based on where the most useful thing was. Harry stayed because he had other things to do. He spent the mornings running the grounds in the cold, which he'd done every morning since arriving, and which the castle had apparently adjusted to, because the path through the lower grounds to the lake was always slightly clearer than the surrounding grass. He spent the afternoons in the library or the empty classrooms, working through things. He wrote long letters home. He received long letters back. Frigga's the longest, Loki's the most useful, Thor's the most enthusiastic and the least grammatically consistent, Odin's the shortest and the heaviest. On Christmas morning, there was a package at the foot of his bed that had no label. He opened it carefully. It was an invisibility cloak, extraordinarily fine fabric, silver gray, the kind of invisibility that wasn't a charm or a glamour, but something woven into the material itself, something that felt when he touched it like the space between certainty and its absence. There was a note. He recognized the handwriting, the loops and serifs of it, the specific way the ink sat on the parchment. "Your father left this in my keeping. I believe it is time it went to you." Harry held the cloak for a long time. He thought about what the mirror had shown him. He thought about his father standing with his mother, the easy warmth of them, the specific genetic evidence of the dark hair problem. He thought about the invisibility cloak and what his father must have used it for, and felt something that was not grief exactly. It was too warm for grief, but that shared grief's particular quality of presence, the feeling of a thing that matters being held. He put it on. He looked at his own invisible hands. He took it off and folded it carefully, and put it in the bottom of his trunk where it sat alongside the Asgardian knife, and the raven's feather, and the letter he'd written on the first night that he'd never sent. Ron appeared from his bed at approximately the correct time for Ron, which was later than Harry and earlier than anyone else might charitably expect. He looked at the pile of packages at Harry's feet, at the expression on Harry's face, and quietly didn't ask. "Happy Christmas," Ron said. "Happy Christmas," Harry said. They went to breakfast and Hermione was already there, reading something dense about advanced transfiguration theory, and she said Happy Christmas without looking up and then immediately closed the book and said, "What did you get?" with the bright-eyed curiosity of someone who has been waiting to ask since they woke up. Harry told them about the cloak, not everything, but enough. Ron was awed and immediately proposed a list of applications that ranged from the practical to the inadvisable. Hermione was thoughtful and asked about the manufacturing tradition, which Harry said was old enough that she probably couldn't trace it, which she accepted with the same reluctance she accepted most things she couldn't immediately research. Then she looked at him. "You found the mirror," she said, not a question. "Yes," he said. And it's handled," Harry said. "The stone is going somewhere safe." She held his gaze. Dumbledore, you trust him with it." "I trust him to do what he said he'd do with it," Harry said, "which is destroy it, yes." She nodded, settled, and opened her book again, and Ron reached for more toast, and declared that this was the best Christmas he'd had at Hogwarts, which wasn't particularly high praise given it was also his first Christmas at Hogwarts, but he meant it thoroughly. The term resumed in January, and Quirrell became wrong in a new way. Harry had been watching the gradient of wrongness all year, the degrees of agitation, the frequency of the cold presence, the intervals of stillness that meant the thing in the turban was suppressed. After Christmas, the gradient changed. The agitation increased, but the stillness went flat. The oscillation between Quirrell and what lived in him became less like a man in an argument with something, and more like a man who had lost the argument and was running on the result. Something had shifted. Something had pushed. Quirrell began disappearing from the staff table at meals more frequently. He began arriving to defense classes with the distracted, glazed quality of someone whose attention was being held somewhere else. He began, and this was the thing Harry clocked with the sharpest attention, glancing at Harry differently, not with the calculated wariness of before, with the specific quality of something recalculating. The stone was gone, Quirrell knew or suspected. The stone was gone and the endgame was changing, and whatever remained of Voldemort was pivoting, reassessing, considering what remained available. Harry was what remained available. The plan had always been the stone. But failing the stone, there was another option, the boy with the scar, the boy his own curse had made, the boy who carried in his blood the last piece of a very old equation. Harry knew this. Loki had told him once, in the context of an entirely different story, but with the specific precision of someone ensuring the lesson applied beyond its immediate context. The most dangerous moment in any campaign is when the original plan fails. That's when desperate things get attempted. He wrote to Odin. "The stone has been removed and destroyed. Whatever is in Quirrell knows this. I believe the next move is toward me. I am not concerned. I know why he can't touch me. But I want you to know where we are." The reply came in 2 days, which was fast by Raven standard. "I know where you are. I have always known where you are. Be ready." The desperate move is the most committed move. Do not underestimate it for being desperate. Harry folded the letter and thought about the Quidditch match, about the juddering broom, about the cold presence looking out through Quirrell's eyes and recoiling from his. He thought about his mother's sacrifice and what it meant in physical terms, not as a story, not as a metaphor, as a fact. The protection was active. It was alive in his blood. Direct contact with what had destroyed him would burn Voldemort's remnant the same way it had burned him on the night of Godric's Hollow. But Odin was right. Desperate things don't stop because they should stop. They stop when they're stopped. February, March. The term moved with the specific momentum of the back half of a year, faster, more pressured, the end visible on the horizon. Harry wrote home more frequently. He studied with Hermione until midnight and went flying before dawn and spent the hours between with the particular sharpness of someone who has identified a threat, tracked its approach, and is waiting for the right moment to move. He was not afraid. He had never been afraid of Voldemort. He had been cautious, which was different and considerably more useful. Fear was the thing Voldemort had always used, fear of his name, fear of his power, fear that created the paralysis in which he operated. Harry had grown up naming things what they were. He had grown up in a house where the inhabitants had faced things that made Voldemort's darkness look like a local problem, and had faced them with the specific quality of people who understood that power is not the same as invincibility. He had 1 month of term left. He was ready. And somewhere in the school, in a classroom that smelled of garlic and old dark things, something that had been waiting for a decade felt the readiness too, and turned toward it and began to move. Chapter 6. The Allfather's witness the castle felt it first. Harry noticed it on a Tuesday in June, 3 weeks before end of term, in the specific way the stones underfoot changed register, a shift in the ambient vibration, the deep structural hum of Hogwarts accumulated centuries of enchantment, as if something had touched the wards from the inside and the wards had noticed. He was walking back from the library with Ron when he stopped mid-stride and put one hand against the wall. Ron stopped. What? Harry kept his hand on the stone. Felt the wards moving through his palm, through the calluses that 9 years of training had put there, reading them the way you read weather in wind direction. The castle's protections were unchanged, external, robust, exactly as layered as they'd always been, but inside them something had crossed a threshold that hadn't been crossed before. It's tonight, Harry said. Ron went very still. You're sure? Yes. They found Hermione in the common room where she'd been for the last 2 hours, bent over her transfiguration revision with the focused intensity that had characterized her all-exam season. She looked up when they came through the portrait hole, and she saw it in Harry's face before he said anything. She closed her book. When? She said. Now, Harry said. It has to be now. He's going to the corridor tonight. Whatever Quirrell has been building toward, he's done building. Hermione stood up. She was already wearing her school robes. She reached into her bag and withdrew her wand with the brisk precision of someone who had been mentally prepared for this moment since October and was not going to waste time being dramatic about its arrival. The cloak, Ron said. Harry had it over his arm already. He'd been carrying it for 3 days, not from fear, from the same practical reasoning that made you check the weather before you left the house. You used what you had. His mother had given her life as a shield, and it hadn't made her weak. It had made the shield. He pulled the cloak out and looked at it for a second. All 3 of us, he said. It's big enough. It's not big enough for 3, Hermione said, in the tone of a person identifying a load-bearing problem. It's bigger than it looks, Harry said, which was entirely true because it was not a standard invisibility cloak and had not been manufactured by anyone who dealt in standard measurements. He shook it out and it fell open with the soft shimmer of something that understood its purpose, and it was, somehow practically, large enough for 3 people who needed to be in the same place at the same time. Ron looked at it. Asgard, Ron said. Asgard, Harry confirmed. They went. The 3rd-floor corridor was quiet and cold and still. The castle had that quality it held at night of being more itself, all the human noise stripped away, the stone and the age and the deep accumulated intention of it sitting fully present in the silence. The door at the end was ajar. Harry stopped and looked at it. The door that had been locked, that had been charmed by Flitwick and warded by McGonagall, and sealed with half the school's combined magical attention, was open. Unlocked cleanly, not broken, not forced, the enchantments laid over it simply unraveled. Quirrell had a gift for charm breaking. Voldemort had 1,000 years of accumulated magical knowledge. Between them they'd found their way through. The 3-headed dog was asleep. They could hear it the moment they pushed the door open, 3 sets of enormous lungs in slow, sonorous rhythm, an exhalation like distant thunder, deep and regular. In the far corner of the chamber, a small Irish flute lay on the stone floor where it had been set down and forgot, still resonant with the last notes that had played through it. He played it himself, Hermione whispered. He played it and then set it down and went through. Came prepared, Ron whispered. Harry moved through the chamber in the shadow of the cloak, stepping around the massive paw that had flopped sideways in sleep. Each paw was the size of a coffee table, and found the trapdoor in the floor standing open, a dark square in the stone with the faintest residual warmth of a recently cast light charm rising from it. He knelt beside it and looked down. We go down, he said. Obviously, Ron said. They went down. The devil's snare was dead. Not dormant, not retreated, genuinely dead, scorched back from the walls and ceiling of the underground chamber with the ruthless precision of a man who had identified a problem and resolved it completely. The tendrils that should have been reaching for them hung limp and blackened, crackling at the edges where the heat had caught. Quirrell had used fiendfire or something adjacent to it, something hot and total that left no ambiguity in its passing. He's a long way ahead of us, Hermione said. She was already moving through the ruined snare. He went through this fast, faster than I expected. He's been planning this since September, Harry said. Longer. He had all year to work out the answers. We had all year too, Ron said. Yes, Harry said, except we spent most of it in class. They went through 3 more chambers in rapid succession. The key chamber had been stripped, all the flying keys caught and caged and grounded by something, the lock turned and the door standing open, feathers drifting on the still air in the aftermath. McGonagall's chess set was what stopped them. The pieces stood ready. The board was full. The white side had not been moved. Quirrell had, it turned out, not played. The pieces stood at attention, waiting, and from the far side of the board, the Black King regarded the open space with the cold patience of something that had been here before and would be here again. Ron looked at the board for a long moment. He cracked his knuckles, which was a gesture Harry had never seen him make before and which communicated something very specific about his internal state. I need to be a bishop, Ron said. Harry Knight left side, Hermione Castle. It's called a rook, Hermione said. It's called whatever wins this game, Ron said, already moving toward the board. What happened over the next 12 minutes was not something Harry thought about strategically while it was happening. He moved when Ron said move, held position when Ron said hold, and watched Ron play with the absolute attention of someone witnessing a person in the full expression of their competence, which was a thing worth watching no matter what form it took. Ron played the way Harry flew, not showing off, not performing, simply being very good at a thing in a way that made the thing look inevitable. The black pieces fell. One by one, then in combinations, then in a cascade that Ron had been building toward since the third move. He was 2 moves from checkmate when the queen took him, and he let her, because the queen taking him opened the rank for the knight Harry was riding, and Harry moved the knight when Ron said now, and the Black King had nowhere to go. The pieces went still. The door on the far side opened. Ron was on the floor, not badly hurt, shaken, caught by the queen's sweep, breathing through it with the slightly distant expression of someone doing a physical inventory. Harry was beside him before the door had fully swung open. I'm fine, Ron said. You are fine, Harry agreed. Can you move? Give me a minute. We don't have a minute, Harry said. Give me 30 seconds, Ron amended. Hermione was already at his other side. Can you go back up, she said. Go back to the surface, go to Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore's not here, Harry said. Quirrell got a message to him earlier today. Something sent him out of the school. He'd seen it, Dumbledore leaving through the front gates in the early afternoon, urgent stride, a ministry owl still orbiting him. He'd known then that tonight was the night, had known it with the cold clarity of a completed equation. The message was false. Voldemort arranged it, so there's no one to go to, Ron said. McGonagall, Hermione said. Flitwick, Snape. By the time they get here, Harry said, whatever happens in that chamber will have happened. I can't wait for them. He stood up. He looked at both of them. Ron on the floor, hand pressed to his ribs, jaw set with the particular stubbornness that was entirely Ron's. Hermione standing, wand out, watching Harry with those clear, complete eyes. I have to go through. I know, Hermione said. She didn't argue it, didn't interrogate it. She had known since October how this ended, and she had made her peace with it, and what remained was only the practical matter of what was needed now. The last chamber before the final door is Snape's, she said, the logic puzzle. 7 bottles, one gets you forward, one gets you back, the rest are either nettle wine or poison. She held his gaze. I've worked out the pattern. The smallest bottle goes forward. The second largest gets you back. You're sure? I'm certain, she said, in the tone that meant she had checked it 5 times and found the same answer each time. There's no logic problem I can't. I know, Harry said. She handed him a folded piece of parchment with the solution written out. She'd been carrying it for a week, he realized, folded in her inner robe pocket, prepared for exactly this, and something about that small, precise preparedness made him feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the underground chamber. You should go back up with Ron, Harry said. Get whoever you can get. I will, she said. He started for the door. Harry. She said his name the way he sometimes said hers, simply, with weight. He turned. You were raised by a god, she said. Whatever is in that last chamber has never met anything like you. She held his gaze for 1 second, clean and direct. Remember that. He looked at her, thought about saying something and found he didn't need to. He nodded once, then he went through. Snape's chamber was everything she'd described, and nothing he'd had time to fully imagine. A vaulted underground room lit by black flames at each end, 7 bottles on a table, 2 doors, and a logic puzzle that was also a locked room that was also a test of whether you were the kind of person who solved problems with your head before you solved them with your hands. He read the note. He found the smallest bottle. He drank it. Cold flooded through him, the specific cold of a potion solution doing what it was designed to do. There and gone, a single breath of ice, and then the black flames at the far door parted like a curtain. He went through. The last chamber was larger than all the others, not because it needed to be, but because whatever was in it had been here long enough to change the space around it. The air was different down here, heavier, older, holding a smell that Harry knew. Cold and metallic and sour, with the specific darkness of something that was not alive in any way that used warmth. The mirror of Eris stood at the far end, exactly as it had stood in the disused classroom, ornate and still, and reflecting the room back at him, with the patience of something that had been waiting to be understood for a very long time. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He had his back to Harry. He was looking at his own reflection with the focused, hungry intensity of someone trying to force the mirror to show them something it wasn't showing them. His hands were at his sides, clenched, and the air around him had the specific texture of a man at the end of his own ability to contain what he was containing. It won't show you what you want, Harry said. Quirrell turned. In another story, the story Dumbledore had planned, the one with a frightened boy who didn't know what he was capable of, this would have been the moment of terror. The evil professor turning to face the vulnerable child. The power imbalance enormous, the stakes total, the outcome in doubt. This was not that story. Harry stood in the doorway of the final chamber with his hands at his sides and looked at Quirrell with the complete, unhurried attention he brought to things that were serious, and he was not afraid. Not performing fearlessness, genuinely not afraid, in the way of someone who has evaluated the threat accurately and found it within the range of what they can manage. Quirrell's face went through its calculations. The stammer was gone. It had been gone since the chess room, he suspected. The performance dropped when the performance stopped mattering. What was left was the real man underneath, and the real man was afraid. The real man had been afraid for months, pressed between what lived in him and what he increasingly understood was at the end of the corridor. Potter, Quirrell said. Quirrell, Harry said, you shouldn't be here. You're not in a position to say what I should and shouldn't do, Harry said. He stepped into the chamber and let the door close behind him. Where is it? The stone. The stone is. Quirrell stopped. Something moved behind his face, a ripple under still water. When he spoke again, the stammer was back, but it wasn't Quirrell's stammer. It was a voice using the stammer as cover, and it was colder than anything in the chamber. The stone is here, boy, here and out of reach of an old man's clever trap. It's in the mirror, Harry said. The voice from Quirrell's face was quiet for a moment. You know about the mirror, it said. I've had a productive year, Harry said. Quirrell's face split into something that was not Quirrell's smile, too wide, too still, the smile of a man whose face was being worn by something that hadn't smiled in a decade and had forgotten how it looked. You know what I need, the voice said, and you know what you are, a boy who survived, a boy who carries in his blood the key to everything I require. I'm not a key, Harry said. I'm a person. Oh, I know what you are, the voice said, and it had dropped the stammer now entirely, had dropped Quirrell's voice and was something else, something that resonated at the back of the teeth. I've known what you are since before you could speak. You are the only being in existence who has felt my full power and survived it. That is extraordinary. I've had 10 years to think about what that means. A pause, and there was something in it, something almost genuine, the specific tone of a very old, very powerful intelligence speaking to something it has had to respect against its preferences. I could use someone like you. I know you could, Harry said. That's not how this goes. He looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back. And beside it, his parents, his mother's red-haired warmth, his father's easy grin, the glasses, the familiar unfamiliar face. And behind them Odin, gray-cloaked, one eye steady. And the stone, small and red and present in his reflection's open palm, the image of the act already complete, the right desire rendered in mirror light. Harry reached into his actual pocket. He'd gone back to the mirror. He'd done it 3 nights ago, quietly, while Hermione thought he was sleeping and Ron was playing chess with himself in the common room. He'd gone back and stood in front of it and reached in with the right desire, not I want to possess it, not I want its power, simply I want to keep it from him, and the stone had materialized in his pocket again. He'd been carrying it since. He held it up now between 2 fingers. Small and red and warm, catching the light from nowhere because it made its own light, the concentrated distillation of everything Nicholas Flamel had spent 6 centuries understanding. Quirrell's face contorted. "Give that to me," the voice said. "No," Harry said. What happened next happened fast. Quirrell moved across the chamber with a speed that wasn't Quirrell's speed, the borrowed speed of something using his body like a tool being pushed past its tolerances. Harry moved 2 sideways, not back, refusing the retreating position on principle and from instinct, stepping around Quirrell's initial grab with the footwork that Thor had been drilling into him since he was old enough to hold a practice sword. Quirrell's hand closed on empty air. He turned. He was fast. He grabbed again and this time caught Harry's wrist, the wrist with the stone. The sound Quirrell made was not a human sound. Not a scream, not a shout, a raw, tearing recoil, the sound of something experiencing a category of pain it has no framework for. His fingers closed on Harry's skin, and what happened was immediate and total, blisters rising where contact occurred, the visible peeling and blistering of flesh around the points of touch, Quirrell's hand releasing with the autonomic force of something that has touched a hot stove and cannot help but withdraw. Harry stepped back. He looked at his wrist, unmarked. He looked at Quirrell's hand, which was shaking, blistered, genuinely damaged in a way that was going to require significant attention. Quirrell was staring at it with an expression of complete disbelief. "I told you," Harry said, "I can't be touched." "Kill him," the voice from Quirrell's head said, with a fury that was beyond strategy now, pure, old, incandescent rage. "Kill him now." Quirrell launched himself again. Harry put both hands on him. It was a deliberate choice. Not the wand was in his robe and he left it there. He caught Quirrell by both shoulders with both hands and held him, the physical grip of a boy trained to fight by the god of thunder, and what happened was large. The protection blazed. His mother's sacrifice, woven into his blood over 11 years of living, channeled through the points of contact with full deliberate intention, detonated through Quirrell's body with the force of something that had been compressed for a decade and released all at once. Light, but not the visual kind, the kind that bypasses vision and registers somewhere else, somewhere older, the light that the universe makes when a fundamental rule is enforced. Quirrell screamed. His flesh was coming apart at the points of contact. Not slowly, rapidly, terribly, the way a candle comes apart in water Voldemort's possession, destroying the vessel it had used as the incompatible force of Harry's protection moved through it. Harry held on. He held on with the absolute calm of a person doing the right thing regardless of how it looked, with the same stillness he'd had at the mirror, at the chessboard, at every moment this year when the choice had been clear, and the path was simply the path. Quirrell's form crumbled. The dark shriek that tore through the chamber when Quirrell collapsed, when the form the remnant had inhabited finally failed, was not a sound the ears processed. It was felt in the chest, in the jaw, in the roots of the hair. It moved through the chamber like a pressure wave, extinguishing the torches, rattling the door, and then it was gone. Gone. Silence. The chamber held it. Harry stood in the silence with both hands at his sides and looked at what was left of Quirinus Quirrell, which was very little, and felt the weight of it, not guilt, not triumph, the specific grave weight of a thing that has been necessary and is now completed. He had not enjoyed this. He had not been afraid. Both things were true simultaneously, and neither canceled the other. The stone was still in his hand. He sat down on the floor. Not because he was hurt, he wasn't, or not in any way that required immediate attention. A bone-deep exhaustion had settled over him, the specific tiredness of having held something very heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. He sat on the cold stone floor of the final chamber, and held the Philosopher's Stone in his open palm and looked at it. He thought about Dumbledore's design. The mirror, the desire, the stone given only to the person who wanted to keep it rather than use it. Brilliant, and also, he let himself think this clearly, insufficient. Brilliant and insufficient, which was the thing about Dumbledore that Harry had been working out all year. A man of enormous intelligence and genuine good intention, building elegant solutions to enormous problems, and occasionally missing the simple thing, the thing that was not elegant, the thing that was just a boy who had been trained by someone who understood that power and protection and sacrifice were not separate categories. He closed his hand around the stone. He would give it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore would destroy it. Nicholas Flamel would know. The world would go on, and somewhere in the wider darkness, whatever remained of Voldemort would be considerably further from a body than it had been 12 hours ago. The chamber door opened. Not the door he'd come through, the other one, the one that connected to something else, some deeper part of the castle's geography that he hadn't mapped. He stood up immediately, wand out now, the stillness back. Dumbledore came through. He was alone. He had the look of a man who has been moving fast for a long time, not quite disheveled, but the composed precision slightly disturbed, as if the composure had been reassembled in transit. He looked at the chamber, at what was left of Quirrell. At the mirror standing intact and impassive, reflecting the empty room back at itself with perfect detachment. At Harry, standing with the stone closed in his fist. He stopped. He looked at Harry for a long time. The message was false, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. I suspected it when I saw you leave. And you came down here anyway. Yes, Dumbledore's eyes moved to the remains of Quirrell. He couldn't touch you, Dumbledore said quietly. Number your mother, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. He opened his hand and held out the stone. This needs to go to Flamel, tonight if possible. Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's palm. He crossed the chamber and took it with the careful hands of a man who understands what he is holding and what it has cost. He looked at it for a moment, and something in his face was private and old and not for observation, and Harry looked away and gave him the moment. When Dumbledore looked up, his expression had settled into the measuring thing, but differently than before. The calculation had changed. There was something new in it. Are you hurt? Dumbledore said. No, Harry said. You held him, Dumbledore said. You held him directly. It was faster than using the wand, Harry said. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was quiet and precise. What you just described as being faster than using the wand is something that most fully trained adult wizards could not have survived, let alone initiated. Harry said nothing. Who are you? Dumbledore said. And it wasn't, he meant it the way Odin meant the important questions, as a genuine inquiry rather than a rhetorical one. As someone who has looked at all the available evidence and reached the limit of what evidence can tell him. Harry looked at him. I'm Harry Potter, he said. Born on the 31st of July, 1980, son of James and Lily Potter. He paused. Ward of Odin Allfather, raised in Asgard. Trained by Thor Odinson and Loki Lofason, and by a grandmother who tells better stories than anyone I've ever met. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm 11 years old and I've ended the immediate threat to the Philosopher's Stone, and I would like, if it's possible, to go to bed. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. Then he did something Harry had not seen him do before and did not entirely expect. He laughed. Not the polished, musical laugh of a man in control of his own presentation. A real one surprised out of him, genuine as an error, the laugh of a man encountering something that has conclusively outpaced his capacity to have predicted it. Yes, Dumbledore said, when he'd recovered. Yes, I imagine you would. The hospital wing was white and clean and smelled of potions. Madame Pomfrey was a woman who communicated almost entirely through the degree of her briskness, and her briskness with Harry was the specific variety that communicated extreme relief expressed as professional irritation. She checked him over, found nothing wrong, and told him to sleep, which was the medical opinion Harry had been arriving at independently for the last 40 minutes. Ron and Hermione had arrived 20 minutes after Harry came out of the tunnels. They'd gotten McGonagall, who had come to the 3rd floor and found the trapdoor open, and sent a patroness to Dumbledore, and then stood at the trapdoor entrance for exactly as long as it took to conclude that whatever was happening below was concluded, which she determined from the quality of the silence. Ron had a cracked rib from the chess queen, which Madame Pomfrey was addressing with the efficient contempt she reserved for Quidditch injuries and enchanted furniture. Hermione had nothing physically wrong with her and was sitting in the chair beside Harry's bed with a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. You're absolutely certain you're not hurt, she said for the 3rd time. I'm absolutely certain, Harry said, because you held him. Physically, that should have. It didn't, Harry said. She looked at him. The protection really works like that. Yes, even now, 11 years later. It lives in my blood, Harry said. It grew up with me. It's been in Asgard for 10 years, in a place where old magic is as ambient as... He stopped. Yes, it works like that. Hermione was quiet for a moment, processing. He's gone, she said. Voldemort, not gone, Harry said. Set back, disembodied again. Whatever form he takes next will take time. He thought about Loki's letter, the stone won't help him without a body, and thought about the body he'd just destroyed. He'll come back, eventually. People like that don't stay gone until someone makes them stay gone. But not now, Ron said, from 2 beds over, lying flat with the careful stillness of a person with a cracked rib who has been told not to move. Not now, Harry agreed. Good, Ron said. That's enough for tonight. The end of term arrived with the gradual winding down of urgency that the last 3 weeks of a school year always produce. Examinations completed, results anticipated, the specific lightness of people preparing to leave a place they have spent 9 months making their own. The great hall was warm and full and end-of-year energized, the house points totals being recalculated by Dumbledore in a way that produced sounds of outrage from the Slytherin table and sounds of incredulous delight from the Gryffindor one. The feast, the points. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate his food and watched it happen around him with the appreciation of someone who understood what it was and why it mattered, not the competition, the community. The 100 small moments of a year lived in close proximity to people who hadn't been his people before September and were now definitively his. Dumbledore stood at the end and spoke. He talked about the year, about community, about the particular bravery of the students whose actions had protected the school in its final hours. He was careful and eloquent and did not say names. He looked at Harry once from the high table, and Harry met his gaze, and what passed between them was not warm exactly. It was something more durable than warmth, something more complicated, the beginning of a respect that was going to need time and honesty to fully form but was formed enough to stand on. After the feast, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, Draco Malfoy stopped him. This was unusual enough that Harry stopped back. Malfoy was alone. The 2 large companions were absent, which was either a choice or a circumstance, and Harry decided to treat it as a choice and respond accordingly. He stood in the torchlit corridor with his hands in his robe pockets and looked at Harry with the expression of a boy who has spent a year reassessing something and has arrived at a conclusion he's still working out how to express. I heard things happened, Malfoy said. At the end of term, in the school, things happened, Harry agreed. Are you all right? Harry looked at him. Yes, he said. Malfoy held his gaze for a moment. The performance, the superiority, the light cruelty, the careful social calculation was absent. What was left was a boy his own age, intelligent, uncertain, working something out. My father says the Dark Lord is gone again, Malfoy said. He says it like it's a bad thing. Harry said nothing. I don't know what I think about that, Malfoy said, and it was the most honest thing Harry had heard him say all year. You've got time to work it out, Harry said. You're 11, Malfoy blinked. Then something crossed his face, not quite a smile, not quite a concession, something in between, the first genuine expression Harry had seen from him. Easy for you, Malfoy said. Easier for me than for most, Harry agreed. Doesn't mean impossible for you, he walked on. Behind him, he heard Malfoy standing in the corridor for a moment, standing still in the way of someone turning something over, something new, that didn't have an old groove to settle into. The Hogwarts Express left on a clear June morning, the platform loud and warm with the particular chaos of 300 students and their accumulated belongings all trying to occupy the same narrow strip of platform at the same moment. Ron's mother was there with her red hair and her enormous warmth, gathering the various Weasley contingent with the efficiency of long practice. She looked at Harry and her eyes did the thing, the recognition, the name, the weight of it, and then she looked at him, just him, and smiled. You're Harry, she said. Ron's written about you. He's mentioned the family, Harry said. Are you going to your family for the summer? Yes, Harry said, going home. Her expression moved through something at the word home. Something about it landed differently than she'd expected, he thought, different from the story she'd been told. She didn't say what it was. Good, she said simply. That's good. He found a compartment with Ron and Hermione. The train pulled away from the platform and the castle fell behind them, diminishing through the window, the towers going one by one as the line curved, until only the highest of them was visible, and then that too was gone and it was just the countryside and the morning. Ron was asleep within 20 minutes, hat over his face, rat on his chest. Hermione read. Harry watched the countryside go by, green and rolling and entirely unlike Asgard, entirely unlike the Scottish Highlands as seen from above on a broomstick, the particular summer English quality of it, fields and hedgerows and the occasional small town flashing past with its church and its high street and its absolute unawareness of the things that had been resolved over the last 10 months in a castle on a loch 40 miles north. What are you thinking about? Hermione said, without looking up. Going home, Harry said. Which one? He looked at her. Both, he said. She nodded and went back to her book, and outside the train the English summer ran beside them green and gold. King's Cross was exactly as it had been 9 months ago. The announcements, the coffee smell, the pigeons with their opinions about ironwork. Harry came through the barrier from platform 9 3/4 into the main hall of the station with his trunk in Hedwig's cage, and the particular quality of having arrived somewhere that had not changed while he had. He had arranged this himself. No Dursleys, there was no story in which the Dursleys were involved, had never been a story in which they were relevant. He had the address Hermione had written in his notebook. He had the Muggle money that Gringotts had exchanged for him, because he had a vault at Gringotts that was larger than he'd expected, and that was going to require a separate conversation at some point, possibly with Loki, who was the obvious choice for financial strategy. He found a quiet corner of the station. He waited. The raven came through the window of the station roof, the high glass ceiling, the ironwork, with the absolute confidence of something that has no interest in or awareness of the concept of restricted airspace. It was enormous. It was Munin. It landed on Harry's trolley handle and regarded him with one bright, complete eye. Harry held out his arm. Munin stepped onto it and regarded him from a foot away, and Harry looked back, and there was a moment of the specific quality that existed between Harry and the ravens, the feeling of being fully seen, assessed, known, and found sufficient. Not found easy, found sufficient. "Hello," Harry said. Munin made a sound. "Tell him I'm well," Harry said. "Tell him it went well. Tell him." He paused and looked at the station around him and thought about what the year had been. Quirrell's turban. Ron's chess game, Hermione's logic, the mirror showing him what he needed to show it, the cold weight of a Voldemort remnant recoiling from his hands. "Tell him I'm ready to come home," Harry said, "and that I'll be back next year." Munin looked at him for one more moment. Then the raven launched from his arm and went up through the station's high air, through the glass roof in the way that certain old things pass through barriers designed for younger things, and was gone. Harry stood in King's Cross Station with his trunk and his owl and the stones safely in Dumbledore's possession and the year behind him. He heard from the street outside, a sound he knew, a low vibration that most people would have identified as a large vehicle passing, a bus or a lorry, the deep resonance of significant mass in motion. He heard it and smiled because he knew what it was, because he had always known what it was, because Odin had never once left him somewhere without ensuring that coming back was a straightforward matter of taking the next step. He picked up his trunk. He walked toward the door. Outside, in the summer London morning, Asgard's bridge was waiting. And Harry Potter, who had survived one Dark Lord's best attempt at an age when he couldn't yet walk, who had been raised by the Allfather and trained by a thunder god, and taught to think by the God of Mischief, and loved by a queen who told stories in the dark, walked toward it without looking back. He had a year to answer for and a summer ahead, and a world that was going to require a great deal more of him before it was done. He was ready. He was, in every sense that mattered, exactly what the year had made him. He was going home.